Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. I've worked there for about the past decade now, so I can really attest to the quality of the work that they do. They work predominantly with the plant medicine ayahuasca, working in the lineage of the Shipibo people. They're a group of people who have a long history of working with these very sacred medicinal plants. And the temple runs 12-day workshops, 6 ceremonies, working with 4 healers or doctors, 2 to 3 facilitators, which are kind of like the bridge between the guests and the healers. There's massage people, bone doctors, pre-ceremony yoga teacher, and really just an amazing support staff from the moment that they're screening people, when they come down, seeing what they need to be working on, what they're looking for, all the way through the process, and then through the integration process that follows the workshop. So if you're interested in working with ayahuasca, it's an amazing place to go. You can check out more information at their website at templeofthewayoflight.org. There'll be a link in the show notes to that. Also, this episode is being brought to you by Ecstatic Dance Online, which is an online transformational dance experience brought to you through the magic of Zoom. It was founded by my friend Raphael and his partner Elena Pashnova. And they say in 1 hour, 45 minutes, you will receive a short but potent opening ceremony, followed by an hour of ecstasy-inducing, expertly crafted DJ set, finished with a closing integration and friendly open space for community and sharing. Each week, the dance ceremony takes on a new and interesting theme. They bring in a variety of guest DJs from around the world, and you'll get a chance to hear different genres of music in an exciting tempo to stoke your inner alchemical fire. Raphael is a certified ecstatic dance DJ from Canada who's a dancer himself. He focuses on the importance of the inner work and processing emotions and feelings and guides in the healing process with his music. And Elena is a passionate dancer and a true nomad. She brings her vast ecstatic dance experience, love of life, and skill as a certified dance movement therapist to the opening and closing settings. So if you'd like more information on that, I'll also put a link in the show notes to that. And then finally, myself and my colleague Marav Artsy, who I interviewed, I believe, in episode 28, are continuing to run dietas here in the Sacred Valley of Peru. The dieta is one of the traditional ways or processes in which people begin to experience the learning and the healing of particular plants through a process of isolation, of fasting, of meditation, and through the ingestion of particular plants, working on particular things. So it's a really amazing opportunity if one is interested in dieting or going deeper into the world of plant work, working with myself and Marav, working in the traditions we've been trained in. We ran a diet in March, and that one is finished now, and we're starting up a new one May 1st, and that runs all the month of May. And then we'll also be doing a second one in September, and there may be another one following that as well, and potentially in some different places in the world. So if you'd like more information on that, you can look at the interview I did with Marav. Also, I did a talk on diets. I did another talk on tobacco. And then you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org and Marav's site at tobaccodiets.com. And there'll be a link to both of those in the show notes. My guest today is my friend Kerry Moran. I met Kerry working at the Temple of the Way of Light. She originally came down as one of the programs we are running is where it takes working with plant medicine and integrating it with other approaches, things like meditation, yoga, self-inquiry, dance, and she was one of the teachers for that. And she's a really interesting woman. She has a background in Tibetan Buddhism, in psychotherapy, now psychedelic-assisted therapy, and really a lot of experience working with a lot of these sacred plant medicines. So it was a really good conversation for me. We got to connect a lot more deeply, learn more about her story, Kerry. It was quite personal in many ways as well. And she just has a beautiful ability to draw on all of these different practices, and I think to really get to the root and the similarities of what these things are pointing towards. So I think and hope you guys will really enjoy this conversation with Kerry. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, Patreon is a really beautiful option. It's a subscription service, and for as little as $1 a month and upwards, you can subscribe. And with that, you get back really nice added benefits, things like early access to shows, Q&As, bonus material. So that's a really big help to me to continue to be able to do this podcast and to bring on these guests. To all the people who have done that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. There's also the option of direct donating via PayPal. There'll also be a link in the show notes to that. And then if you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube channel, Universe Within Podcast YouTube channel, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, and liking the video. That's a really big help with the algorithms. Feel free to leave any comments, questions in the comments section. And then with the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts, also subscribing to the show and leaving a starred rating and a short review. That's a really big help with the algorithms for the audio version. So that's it. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Kerry. I would say let's start with some of your background. So we met, we were working together at the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. I think you came down, you were maybe part of the Deep Immersion, which is like a longer program, and I think you were teaching at the time, was the first time I met you. And I think you were doing some maybe integration work with the temple.
Not integration.
No?
Let's not say I did integration work.
Okay. But you were teaching.
I was teaching at the Deep Immersion program, and we may have met in October 2015, if you were around then, because that was the first time I came to the temple.
I know it's been a long time. I'm kind of bad with timelines, right. But yeah.
Anyway, we met at the temple around then. Yes,
yeah.
And I did teach there for like a year or something.
Yeah. So I know, where were you teaching? You were teaching like mindfulness and meditation?
Well, the context of the Deep Immersion is there's lots of room to teach. Mm-hmm. So there was things on mindfulness and embodiment and also emotions. And I had a dance class going. Oh, wow. Ecstatic dance and astrology, so all
beautiful.
sorts of things that can help complement people's experience, right?
Yeah. So I remember when I met you, you seemed very kind of knowledgeable or immersed in also Buddhist philosophy, and I found that very interesting. I also just spoke with Mihao today. And
I've been wondering about him. How is he?
He sends his love. He seems like he's doing really well. But he just really wanted me to say thank you on behalf of him to you, because you really helped to open him up to kind of that path also.
I gave him possibilities. Oh, that's so great. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
And he's still in Poland?
He's still in Poland, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I tried to convince him to come on, but he's got to think about it a little.
They need another permaculture coordinator, but I don't think he's going to do that. Yeah.
So maybe just a bit about your background. I know you're from the U.S., but you spent a long time in Asia. So who's Kerry? Like, how did she come to be doing what she's doing, and what eventually led you to the Amazon where we met for the first time?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. That's a
big question.
That's a big question, yeah. So where would I start with that? I would say I think I've been fortunate enough to have several lifetimes in this body already. At least 2, 3, 4 distinct ones. And in my 20s and 30s, I spent 14 years in Asia. I lived in China, and then I moved to Nepal and lived in Kathmandu for 13 years, I think. Wow. Not planning any of this. It just happened beautifully. But...
and what year was that? Not to try and guess your age or anything, but just for context of what
I went to
that...
China in 84.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I came back to the States in 98.
Mhm.
I mean, to live. Obviously, I wasn't solidly out of my country for 14 years. But yeah. So...
So that would have been a big kind of time for change in China too. A lot was going on.
that was really interesting to be there in 84, right after the Cultural Revolution just kind of dissipated, because there was so much trauma there. I mean, there still is. It's just all covered up from the Cultural Revolution. And I mean, you know about a bit about that, yeah? The massive overturning of everything, of every aspect of society.
Yeah.
And my husband and I were teaching English there, one of the first batches of American teachers to be sent there. And our fellow teachers, the Chinese teachers, would tell us stories about having to kneel on broken glass with a dunce cap on, you know, being publicly repudiated. And it was all just like, that happened, you know, very nervous laughter.
Yeah.
But China has changed so much since then, obviously. Every time I go back, it's like, I don't recognize the places I was there.
It was really interesting. I remember something very distinctly. I was spending some time in China, and I was I'd been curious to learn Tai Chi, and so I was in a Tai Chi academy in Wuhan, and it was very fascinating because I remember really distinctly. I think there was one other foreign guy there. He was an English guy, and me, and everyone else was Chinese. And they would ask like these questions, like how did you find this place? You know, but they were very like happy that I was there, and because they really wanted to share this knowledge, and they were like, how did you hear about Tai Chi? And I was like, oh well, you know, in the U.S. there's also people who practice, and they were like, no.
Right.
And it was like, what do you mean? They're like, no, Tai Chi is Chinese. It comes from here. It's not practiced anywhere else. And I was like, no, like there are people practicing. I mean, we have a huge Chinese population in the U.S. and people practice. They're like, no.
Yeah. What year were you there?
This would have been 2007, maybe, something like that.
Yeah.
But it was just so strange. Like it was like they couldn't comprehend that there was
something
beyond China.
Indeed.
It was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're teaching English in China.
My husband got a job teaching English in Nepal. Let's go to Kathmandu. It sounds like a cool place. Seriously, that was the depth of the motivation. But the forces at play were deeper too, you know. So right before we went to Kathmandu, Tibet opened up for the first time to foreigners. This was in the summer of 1985. And we got to journey across Tibet on the overland on the way to Nepal. And it just touched me so much, you know, the quality of the Tibetan people, their devotion to the Dalai Lama, to the Buddha Dharma, you know, and the way that had been repressed and suppressed by the Chinese for so many years, but their faith was still so strong. And I saw even in that first trip through there, that first journey through there, that, wow, these people have something that I want. You know, they're so balanced, they're so grounded, they tell great dirty jokes, or really bad dirty jokes, I mean, but they're very earthy, but their hearts are also open and they're connected to something bigger in a way that's just unshakable. So that was kind of my first contact with Tibetan Buddhism, which ended up being a big thing waiting for us, for me in Nepal and Kathmandu, because of all the places in the world to study Tibetan Buddhism, actually, Kathmandu is, or at least was, probably the most diverse and the biggest.
And for people who aren't familiar with that, is that because there's a big like refugee population in Nepal?
They mostly assimilated, you know. The Tibetan diaspora was started in the 50s when the Chinese came in and invaded. You know, many Tibetans fled to India along with the Dalai Lama, and there's communities there, but Kathmandu, which has a long history of connection with Tibet anyway on the trade routes, has also several big Tibetan communities, and they're pretty, I wouldn't call them refugees anymore. They're displaced persons, certainly, but they've created lives and businesses and built many, many monasteries, and many great teachers and lamas were living around Bodha stupa at the time. I don't know if you've heard of Bodhanath. It's the big, big stupa on the outskirts of Kathmandu, created with Tibetan support, I think, 700, 1,000 years ago. So, big Tibetan community there. We ended up living there, still not knowing we were Buddhist. Took a few years to get the message, but eventually I did connect with the Dharma in a way of just recognizing, there's something here for me. I want to learn this. I want to study this. I want to take refuge, become a Buddhist, and treat this as my spiritual path and practice. So.
And what was the calling for you? Like what stood out that made you drawn to that?
Yeah. Well, one, I like to say I'm a seeker, but I'm also a finder. But I've been tuning into spiritual things since I was a child, looking for spirituality in the Catholic Church where I was raised, but sadly it never spoke to me, even though I sought very sincerely. I did not find in that domain. So reading spiritual books and practicing yoga from the time I was 14, I don't know what made me go down to the library and check out a yoga book and teach myself in my bedroom, but that's, there was a calling, there was an affinity towards these things. And reading Henry James and Aldous Huxley and exploring psychedelics from a very early age, just knowing that there's more. There's more, and I want to connect with that more. So partly Tibetan Buddhism in particular spoke to that, and another part was what I told you about traveling in Tibet, because I went back every summer for the next, 3-4 years and spent months traveling with Tibetans and seeing the quality of their being, and again, just feeling so connected with it, so impressed by it, so much like, this is good. So that kind of personal connection too.
And how would, this is another big question, but how would you, because I feel like Buddhism is something much like yoga, it's become part of the everyday vernacular of people. But how would you describe Buddhism?
So I practice in the Vajrayana tradition, and in particular Kagyu, Nyingma. My teachers belong to those lineages. There's different flavors. So some of the main underpinnings of that I've learned and practiced are that all beings have Buddha nature, okay? All sentient beings have this little spark of consciousness. You call it Buddha nature. It's innately pure, completely unobscured, completely enlightened in itself, right? And yet, for humans who are quite fortunate to be in a precious human body so we can work with this Buddha nature, it gets covered up by obscurations, by, of course, trauma, emotions, but also just by our conceptual mind, conceptual thought, covers up that spark. So part of practice, part of meditation practice is just learning to work with conceptual mind in a way that helps it start to release. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of your concepts. You still think, you still operate in the world, but you do it in a way that doesn't require so much grasping and thinking that that's all there is. Yeah? And when you practice, you sit on your cushion, and in the Dzogchen tradition, you really just relax. Deeply, deeply, deeply relax into the clarity of awareness and the warmth of the heart that is your true nature. And for a refugee from Judeo-Christian tradition, like me, or many people I know, that whole approach is just so simple, so practical, so profound. It's not about purifying your sins or begging God for forgiveness or having an intermediary. It's just, here's my awareness. How can I become more and more and more relaxed and aware in that state, right?
I was listening to an interesting conversation today. It was more related actually to politics, but they were speaking about, I guess you could call it ontology, like the nature of being. And one of the things they were kind of debating about was the nature of reality. And, because it was interesting what you said, that there's more, I forget the exact way you said it, but there's more to hear than maybe we think.
And doesn't plant medicine show us that too?
Yeah. So from a Buddhist perspective, do you have a sense of like what that thought is, like what is reality? Because obviously so many of us, when we think of reality, we think of like what we can touch and smell and taste and
Tangible.
and yet you were saying that in the Buddhist tradition, it's pointing towards also that there's something beyond what we take to be.
Sure. I mean, like many spiritual practices and paths, right? They generally point towards something beyond just embodied physical reality. So one way of looking at it from the Tibetan perspective might be that there's relative reality. Okay, we're sitting here talking, there's the sofa here, the sun's shining, all this exists, yeah, but there's also ultimate reality. And in ultimate reality, it's a very different picture. And that can be explored, again, through practice. And, I don't want to say there's only relative and ultimate. There's all other degrees of reality also, right? Tibetan Buddhism is quite flamboyant and dramatic and has a lot of room for demons and deities and spirits and ritual and color and stuff like that, which are, I guess, are meant to support the mind in relative reality to opening up to something more,
And how would you, because I know within the Tibetan tradition, like obviously there was a spirituality before the Buddha,
Yeah.
or however we take that, whether it's real or myth, but that introduction of the idea of Buddhism, of Buddhist thought, there was the Bon tradition.
Yes, yeah.
So what is your understanding of like how these, maybe like to start, like what is the Bon tradition, and then how is the influence of Buddhism kind of intermingling with that, create something that seems quite special, because
Right.
Tibetan Buddhism does seem very distinct from maybe other paths of Buddhism that are
Right.
practiced around the world.
Right, and sometimes it doesn't have much to do with the Buddha per se, although the teachings are still there. Yeah, so Bon was the indigenous practice, religion, you don't want to say that, spiritual practice in Tibet before Buddhism was introduced to it in, I think, the 8th century, something like that. So Bon is a practice that has a lot of connections with the deities of the earth, just like here. They don't call them apus in Tibet, but kind of the same thing. The protectors, the nature spirits, all sorts of multi-layered things. It's quite a shamanic path, actually, and it's still around in some ways. And then when Buddhism was introduced to Tibet in the 700s or 800s, I don't know, by Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, a tantric wizard magician from India. I love this because it's just so rich and juicy. He brought the Dharma to Tibet. He subdued the demons. He bound them over to serve the Dharma. This is how the story goes. So that, he didn't wipe away or expunge Bon. It was more like, okay, all these local spirits are going to be enmeshed or entwined with Dharma now. And that's part of what makes Tibetan Buddhism special, I think. So I find it, very earthy, very pagan in a way. Pretty wild. It has scope, certainly in some lineages, to deal with the dark side, the shadow, as well as the bright stuff. It is by no means just sitting on your cushion and trying to think pure thoughts, or not trying to not think at all, which never works anyway. It has a great capacity to work with the emotions and the passions and embodied energy, and that's part of what always appealed to me. And again, I start to find this remarkable intersection with plant medicine, which we'll get to eventually in this conversation. But yeah.
One thing I always found interesting about, actually, let me try and open this window and get this fly out. I don't think he left, did he?
I think he left.
Okay.
He got the hint.
One thing I found really interesting when I was there was I think it was Milarepa, and this idea that he was this kind of great warrior, this warlord who actually killed many, many people, and then he found the light, the calling, Buddhism, and now he's revered, and I think that's really interesting because for me, it seems like we're living in a time where, you were talking about this idea of like Judeo-Christian thought and this idea of like sin. But I think so much of what I see is like almost this judgment of like, if you've made a mistake,
Yeah.
that's who you are now,
Yeah.
And there's no redemption.
Yeah.
And something I find really interesting with the story of Milarepa is like, I mean, this guy was like...
he was a tantric magician.
Yeah.
He caused the whole dining hall his evil uncle was in to collapse, and he killed 50 people like that out of revenge, because he was treated so badly.
Yeah.
And yet he could... That's part of this path, I think, is that it involves the power to transmute the base energies. It's alchemical in a way. Again, just as plant medicine can be. To transmute the darker, heavier energies into serving, you wouldn't say the divine in Buddhism, but into serving the basic nature of reality, let's say. Yeah. And to benefit beings, which is a huge part of the path.
I think I was also reading that the Dalai Lama was saying he's not going to have a successor, or that like the at least that part of the tradition is kind of ending with him.
I haven't read things like that. I may be not up to date, but I think perhaps he was just saying in an open-ended way that anything could happen. He said before he could be reborn as a woman. Certainly he'll be reborn out of China and Tibet proper, because the political control... Did he come back?
Just leave it open for a second.
Okay. Sounds like the same one. He's made it quite clear he won't be reborn in China proper, including the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China, because then China would have political control over that incarnation like it has taken over other lamas, and it's not been a good thing. So, do
you see that tradition is still very alive, or like many indigenous or kind of older traditions, do you think a lot of that is being lost, or do you think there's still, maybe because of the diaspora, there's still like
juice in it?
Yeah, juice in it.
That's such an interesting question. And again, I see the parallels with other indigenous traditions. The Tibetans say something like, we held on to the Dharma and the teachings too tightly. Tibet was a very closed realm, right? And so the Chinese had to come and break it open. And then it was like shaking the apple tree so that the apples rolled all over the world. The apples being the teachings, right? And there's quite a huge and dynamic Tibetan Buddhist scene, I guess, in the United States, in Europe. There's teachers, there's centers all over the world. There's a Buddhist Chorten I've been out to a few times, just past Chinchero.
Oh, interesting.
That a teacher built there, or his community did. So it's definitely alive, and it's changing, and in some ways it's changing for the better to serve modern people. In some ways, some things are being lost, perhaps. Yeah, I think he's gone now. The fly whisperer. Like so many indigenous traditions, change is happening. There's no way to avoid it. You can't preserve culture in a static setting. It dies like that. And when you look at Tibetan Buddhism, you see how it's changed throughout the centuries, taking in Bon and generating new practices. So I'm hopeful that it continues to change and it serves people in the modern world. I mean, I think it does. It can, yeah.
That seems like a really important point, which I feel like often gets overlooked, is exactly like you described it. Like, I mean, the idea of entropy is essentially like correlated to death. Like, and yet so many people, we look to tradition as if it's static, and we want it to always stay the same and never change, and yet that's the road
But
to...
nothing, Buddhism will
Right.
tell you, nothing stays the same, everything changes. Yeah, when I was in Kathmandu in the mid-'80s, I was first feeling real pain at seeing old beautiful architecture being torn down or old traditions kind of starting to dissipate. And over time I just started to realize, hey, this is the way of the world. There's no way to stop it. You want to stop all foreigners from entering Kathmandu and make a nice zone just for me? Yes, I would like that, but that's not the way things go. And then beautiful things come out of those changes too, and the cross-cultural pollination that can happen, and the new things that can be developed.
Yeah. So what was that process like for you of beginning to learn or to train? I don't know how you would describe it, but...
Study and practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really good. First of all, to be able to live there and go to teachings by different masters and to have connections with teachers. And I don't mean, I think we all have this vision, and I had this vision of, I'm going to find a special lama, and he's going to tell me I'm special. And, it's all going to be like I see in the movies or whatever. Now it's not like that, But just to be able to bring your experience to somebody who knows, who's walked that path, who's further down the path, way further down the path than you are, and say, here's what I'm experiencing now. How can I continue to work with this? And he draws on his own experience, and he also draws on a millennia of traditions, many of which were written. Tibetans had a massive... it's preserved in pechas and scriptures, So I was and am really grateful for that, and also for the groundedness it gave me in having a tradition I've been connected to for more than 30 years now. I still consider myself a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, even though it's not necessarily at the forefront of my life right now. Other things have come to the forefront. But I really, really appreciate the grounding that's given me and the way it's cultivated my mind to become more fluid, more flexible, more open, more peaceful, more compassionate. And when I started to work as a therapist, which is another chapter in my life, I found myself naturally drawing on everything I knew, I had learned from Dharma practice. It just was like, this is my greatest resource. So when I sit with a client or a patient, I would just sit like I did on the meditation cushion, open, spacious, loving, see what happens. And it's been really beautiful.
Would you describe it primarily as a practice of the mind?
As opposed to...
A physical practice?
There's certainly a physical component. One of the things you do, starting off, are the 4 preliminaries, the Ngondro practice. You do 100,000 prostrations, full prostrations on the floor, which was not a good thing for my knee, but I did them. 100,000 mantra recitations, 100,000 mandala offerings, 100,000 guru yoga visualizations, And just the practice of doing anything 100,000 times is really going to ground you, yeah. So there are physical components to it, but obviously it's working with the mind, although not just that, mind is a very tricky word, and I feel like sometimes it's mistranslated. Tibetan has many different words for aspects of the mind. We don't have those in English. But mind, when we say it, we tend to think of our mental, conceptual mind, right? I think from the Tibetan perspective, there's more dimensions to that, including the dimension of awareness, Rigpa, which is tied in with our Buddha nature.
And emotions would be in that same realm?
Emotions would be in that realm, but to tell you the truth, I did not find Buddhist practice so valuable for working with my emotions. I think it has the capacity or the potential to, especially some of the tantric approaches. And I think with certain teachers, they can do amazing things with that. But I found working with depth psychology and then, of course, plant medicine to be really helpful in opening up my emotions and allowing them to flow. And I think there's a real easy way that Western practitioners can sit on the cushion and we just sit on our emotions. And we sit on all the past stuff that's buried, and we're practicing up here, but whatever's going on down here is a whole different thing. Yeah. And for me, it took ayahuasca to open this up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You use this word tantra. That's another word that I think people are familiar with, but they have a very particular idea of what that means.
Right. And what it means in the West is sexual practices that you go to a workshop and do or something, right? And I'm looking at Tantra, which has both Buddhist and Hindu components. There's ancient Indian Tantra, Tibetan Buddhist Tantra. It's an embodied practice that encompasses every aspect of life. Every aspect. Sex, of course it includes sex, but sex is not that big when you think about all of life, So everything from, just the feeling of my fingers touching, right? And getting into that sensation deeply. And the waves of energy that can arise from that, Eating a meal, tending to a baby, taking a walk, doing your work, all this can be encompassed in tantric practice. And it doesn't involve sexuality.
Why do you think the sexuality component became so well known? Was it just that so many traditions kind of leaned more on I think they talk about the two hands, and so maybe the more like right-handed path of like renunciation and avoiding, and there's just so much emphasis on that. Like, then this other tradition is coming along and saying, no, like embrace everything. And
I think two reasons. One is sex sells. The other is that, we, again, and speaking of Westerners, Europeans, Americans, Australians, whatever, Judeo-Christian refugees, there's tends to be a split between spirituality and the physical, or spirituality and sexuality. And the tantric approach can be very healing to that because it harnesses physical energies in the service of awareness, or unites them with awareness.
Yeah, that seems like a really interesting thing. Because growing up in the U.S., the U.S. is very open in many ways. And yet, even in sexuality, I remember moving to New York, and I was at this little bar. It was called Max Fish. It was like this kind of old beatnik bar in the Lower East Side, and this guy, I think his name was Taylor Mead. He was like one of the Andy Warhol crew, and he would come in and. He said something like, someone asked him, like, why do people move to New York? And I think he used a more vulgar word, which I won't repeat on the podcast, but basically to have sex. And because there was like this freedom of like, being able to express yourself and, sleep with whoever you want. And there was like real liberty in that. Even, in the 60s and 70s, the hippie movement, that was a big aspect, was this idea of free love. So, I think on the one hand, there is a lot of openness, and yet there still is a lot of repression.
Yeah.
We often refer to it as like puritanical beliefs. And I remember when I was in France, it was very eye-opening because, in certain ways, one could say France is maybe more closed in certain ways, but I did feel that in the realm of sexuality, it was far more open. It was just, you would talk about it. I remember I was renting a room from this 70-year-old woman, and she would talk to me about sex in the morning, and really inquisitive. And I was, this is so strange, It's like I'm talking to my grandmother about sex. Where I came from, that would never happen.
Right.
But she was just so open about it.
Right.
And so, kind of that idea about sexuality. Do you think that's, because you mentioned this idea of, there often is a disconnect. Do you think that's just something that like it's not expressed enough, and therefore we maybe are drawn to turn to these traditions where it's like, hey, like I can actually go into this to some degree?
I think there's a wounding at the root of our embodiment for many, many, many of us. You just look at how people move. through airports or walk, you can see certain tightness or certain patterns, and in a different country, people move in different ways, and in Brazil, it's pretty nice. And then you go to, I don't know, Denver or something, and it's a whole different energy, right? So I think many of us have not been fully initiated into our embodiment as humans through difficult child-raising practices, through the fact we're supposed to sit still and shut up in school and just do our work and be good little boys and girls. There's not a lot of freedom or joy in the body, which also drives consumer society. I'll buy this, it'll make me feel good, But, you live in Peru, for heaven's sake, or Nepal, or, other countries you've probably lived in too, and you see people just move differently in the world. People connect differently. People express love physically. I don't mean sex, but just mothers and their babies or whatever. On the colectivos, I'm seeing it all the time, the joy that a mother gets from her child. And in America, it's probably like the mom's on the phone typing and the kid's pulling on her sleeve for attention but not getting it. So there's so many levels of wounding that we carry that alienate us from our human birthright. And where was I going with this? Some of these teachings or practices can be helpful in helping us reconnect, like Tantra. And again, Tantra can be about the sensuality in every dimension of being, not just sexuality. But that's not really talked about or known.
When you were in Tibet, did you, because you're speaking about this idea of like embodiment and how we're raised in the culture, I would imagine there was this sense that the spiritual practice was very much like embodied in the day-to-day lives of people as well.
Yeah. I remember traveling out to Mount Kailas. It's a sacred mountain in far western Tibet, sacred to Hindus and Buddhists. And pilgrims go there, and they have for millennia, and they go and they walk around the mountain. It takes 3 days. You can do it in a day, but it takes 3 days. So I traveled out there 2 years in a row and spent a lot of time there, and actually ended up writing a book about it with a friend who's a photographer about Kailas. But the journey there and the journeys back, we'd be traveling with Tibetan pilgrims or merchants, compass. And I just love the whole rhythm of life on the truck, because we're traveling in open back trucks, no roof or anything, just bouncing along the dusty road. And people spinning their prayer wheels, doing mantra very quietly. And then the minute something shifts, they put it down and they go deal with it. Time to build a fire. Time to do some gambling with the dice. I remember at one point, the first year I went out with my husband, and he was really, really sick, and he was vomiting off the side of the truck, bouncing along the road, and this guy had his feet in his lap, and he was just doing the mani, just doing the prayer wheel and the mantra recitation, So it's that kind of seamless interweaving of spirituality and life that was one of the things that touched me and still does,
Yeah, I mean, that seems like something that is a very kind of stark difference, is that in many of the cultures we come from, things are very compartmentalized, like, okay, Sunday is the day for spirituality, or 2 months from now is the time for my ayahuasca workshop, and that's where I'm going to deal with everything, and then I go back to my life, which is completely separate.
Yeah, we're encouraged to silo things, I think, in the interest of efficiency, maybe. And again, as the disruption between the head and the heart, or the head and the body, or the head and the emotions, or the head and other people, there's a lot of disconnection going on, which also comes from trauma. That's how I see it,
So then so you're living in Tibet for a while, and
Nepal.
then Nepal, studying Tibetan Buddhism. So I guess at some point you left, because you said you came back, every year for a certain amount of time.
Not even every year, but I wasn't gone for 14 years, So I left in 98,
So you were there for 14 years or something?
China a year, and Kathmandu for 13 years, Yeah.
And what was finally the impetus to make that change?
My marriage fell apart a few years before that. It was very painful for me, I think for everybody. Our children were like 5 and 2 at the time. It's never easy when you have small children, or rarely, right? So, but I realized it was kind of like, well, if this is going to happen, and I don't want this to happen, but if it's going to happen, then I'm going to take responsibility for my life, and I'm going to reinvent myself and start my new life now, rather than waiting for some time in the future. And I'd already seen, kind of visionarily, I guess, without plant medicine at that point, that my future direction was going to lead me towards becoming a therapist, a psychotherapist, and studying depth psychology and starting a whole new career. Because before I was a journalist, freelance journalist and writer, editor. That's what I did in Asia. So this was like a reinvention around the age of 35 to 42, let's say. So, I went back to the States and started a graduate program at Pacifica Graduate Institute, which was a wonderful, wonderful place for me. It emphasizes Carl Jung, depth psychology. It was the reward for all this painful destruction that had occurred before. And the kids came with me, and, I just reinvented myself and started a new life in America. But I also felt at that time, I was getting the message, it's time for you to bring back what you've learned. Everything you've learned in Nepal and Tibet and Asia, it's time for you to bring it back to your own people, because I started to realize this is where I have the most leverage, right? This is where I can speak the most fluently. These are the people I understand in my country, and I can frame things according to their perspective, but start to show them something different too. So it was part of becoming a cultural, bridge person.
Bridge keeper,
Yeah.
And with psychology or psychotherapy, do you think that was just an extension of your interest in Buddhism, was like understanding the nature of the mind and why people are suffering, what they're struggling with?
I think it actually came from what happened when I was 35, which was my second child died in his sleep. We woke up and found him dead. It was the most devastating, heartbreaking, tragic, earth-shattering event for me and for us as a family, And it was through the very long process of healing from that I started to get the feeling like I want to help other people who are going through this or something similar to this, because I'm walking this path and I can share what I've learned. And somehow that makes it better. What can I say? I mean, what else is suffering for but to learn and grow and, share what we've learned. Yeah.
And I know I'm asking a lot of definitions, but again, even something like psychotherapy, I think a lot of people think they know what that is. What is that for you? Like, where did that practice originate from? What is it trying to accomplish, and how does that look like? I mean, if someone is interested in exploring that.
Right. And I will speak just for me. It's my personal definition, because there's many different approaches in psychotherapy, which is really just the healing of the mind, of the psyche. And the psyche is not just the mental mind, but everything, the unconscious, the subconscious, the emotions. It's a healing path, and it's a mainstream healing path in our culture, which I kind of like, to have one foot in the mainstream at least. So for me, I was already so influenced by my Buddhist practice and all my spiritual exploration and my early psychedelic work and all that, that it was clear I wasn't going to be doing cognitive behavioral therapy mainstream. It was going to be something more on the fringes, I guess. But I've been reading Carl Jung since my early 20s. I always had a book of his on my bedside table. When I went to Tibet, he was one of the 2 books I had. And we talked about Jung the other day, right? And what a magical man he was. And I told you that description somebody had said, calling him a shaman in a suit, which I feel is true. Jung went and mined the ancient lost history of Europe in terms of the alchemical tradition, the astrological tradition. He retrieved things lost in the European past and brought them to the present time. He was quite an amazing man. Mm-hmm. So I was really pleased to find a program where I could study with a Jungian influence and keep exploring more deeply how to work with the unconscious, how to work with dreams, how to work with symbols and images. These are always things that really excite me and turn me on. And psychotherapy was one way of doing that, being a shaman in a suit, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Or a cardigan.
A pantsuit.
Mm-hmm. I think when a lot of people think about psychology, they think about Freud. What do you think is the difference between that way of working and the more Jungian approach?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, they had a connection, Freud and Jung was Freud's, I don't want to say student, but Freud was his mentor maybe for a long time, and then they had a rift over the nature of the unconscious, I think. Mm-hmm. And Jung realized he had to go his own way because he felt so deeply that what he was experiencing had some truth in it, whereas Freud would be more like, that's just projection or whatever. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we had a class on Freud in the program, and I got to really appreciate Freud as a very deep and sexually motivated being. And when you look at their astrological charts of the two of them, you start to see, that makes sense for Freud's personality. And that makes sense for Jung's personality. Mm-hmm. But there's not much Freudian stuff around nowadays, I don't think, it's kind of not so popular now.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's just because it's very niche in a way, like it has its limits? And
I don't know to what extent it's been upgraded for the modern mind, because Freud was 100 years ago and people have changed. It also is quite an investment financially and time-wise. Freudian psychology is one way of going into the unconscious, absolutely, and I respect that. I prefer ways that are maybe a little more fluid or playful or more fun.
And when you say unconscious, what do you mean by that? Because again, that's I think a word that many people have very different ideas of what that actually means.
Yeah. So there's our conscious mind, the level at which we're speaking now. And that is maybe 20% of what's going on in this room in terms of energetics or perceptions that we're not aware of here, but we're still feeling. The interpersonal dynamics, the stuff that we each carry from our pasts, which are buried in there. The unconscious is everything you don't know, which is quite a lot when you think about it, right? That's the majority of reality. And especially everything, the personal unconscious, everything you don't know about yourself. Everything that happened in the past that you forgot or you shoved away because it was too much or it was so traumatic and overwhelming you just couldn't deal with it at the time, so it got buried. Or it falls into your shadow because it wasn't acceptable in the family you were growing up in. So you learn to not be that noisy person or whatever, and all your, say, your joie de vivre, your vivacity or whatever, got shoved down. So you become very, phlegmatic, practical, Mm-hmm. When people talk about the shadow, they often think, these are the bad parts of me, and sometimes they are, but the shadow can also be the bright parts of you, talents or skills that you really have, but they just never have had room to develop. So the unconscious, the personal unconscious can include those dimensions, and then there's the collective unconscious that we have as humans, or as Americans say, or Peruvians have their segment of collective unconsciousness. All the stuff from the past, memories, ancestors, DNA, trauma. You look at race in America, for example, right? There's a huge example of the collective unconscious. It's been carrying a lot of stuff, and some of it is coming to light, which is good, right? Mm-hmm. But it's painful, and it's difficult, and it's confusing. And often we're like, why aren't we over this yet? It's because there's still such a huge mass of stuff down there that needs to be brought into the light and seen and redeemed. And that's a process that can happen personally, collectively, probably for all humans too. Yeah.
Would an analogy then be like similarly to the difference between sex and gender, like sex being the individual unconscious, and gender, how that's embedded within a collective, within a society, the norms, the past, the trauma?
Yeah, although I think you still have a bit of biology in there, and I'm not sure where that falls in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's not completely hidden for me, that analogy, but I would have to think about it some more. Yeah.
And so psychotherapy, in the way you were trained, it's a practice to be able to go into the unconscious and to become conscious of the unconscious in an attempt to bring those to light, or to release, to heal them.
In an attempt to heal, in an attempt to grow, in an attempt to understand more, just, it's a whole bunch of different practices. And it's also an attitude, which I also feel is so important when one is working with plant medicine, to be able to bring to a ceremony just an attitude of warmth towards oneself. If I was working with another person, I would have warmth towards them and their unconscious, but you can have this inside too. Warmth and curiosity and openness and not judging anything, just like whatever arises. This is Buddhist again. Whatever arises, it's just the display. We're just watching it. Let's just watch the display without having to define it, or fix it, or put it into a box, or heal it immediately. Just this deep acceptance of whatever comes. And I found just with that attitude that the unconscious starts to warm up and release a little more. Because if it's met with judgment or fear, it's just like a person. Why would you want to hang out with somebody who is judgmental and fearful and critical of you? Be like, no thanks, I don't talk with you.
So the end goal isn't necessarily to understand it, although there could be an understanding, but simply to allow those things to come up, because potentially they've been suppressed.
That's the process, that's the practice. I don't like having too tight an end goal, because then that can turn into manipulation and extraction. And I think there can be a whole, how would you say, colonization of the unconscious or the psyche that can happen. People can have a very extractive approach towards, I want to find out the root of my problem and get rid of it. And that strikes me as just like, coming into a country and pillaging it and mining for gold and strip mining, It's not respectful to the whole environment. But the warmth is the process or the practice. And I mean, sure, you can have intentions or aspirations or goals, I guess, if you want, of, I want to heal, I want to release, I want to understand, I want to grow. That can just be a big one. And it's a fascinating process, let me say, and it's really fun to track your dreams, and let your dreams speak to you, and get these messages from the unconscious, for example, or to play with intuition, which is an interface between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and just realize you know something, and to trust that knowing, which only comes with time. It takes time to cultivate that.
That's an interesting definition. I hadn't heard that before, that intuition is the meeting point between the conscious and the unconscious.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I just said that, but it sounds right to me. Because it's definitely not rational, conceptual mind that knows everything. Intuition is knowing without knowing how you know it. It's just a direct knowing. And again, this plant medicine is a big conduit for that, right?
You mentioned the idea of dreams, and I know Jung was very fascinated by those dreams and archetypes. How do you see the work of dreams? It's a topic I've touched on a number of times, and I find it very fascinating, because even in the English language and in a lot of the cultures we come from, we have these expressions which are very, all of these expressions come from a real root. I think that's why etymology is so fascinating too. But even in expressions we use, things like that's just a dream. Or a child has like a really big idea and someone will tell them almost like in a degrading way, like, no, you're just dreaming.
Right. But you can also say, he's so dreamy or whatever. There's still a bright side to that. Yeah, no, we don't honor dreams in this culture, and in other societies sometimes they do. I can't remember where it is that everybody gets up and shares their dreams the next day, all the adults in the community. It strikes me as a wonderful practice.
I think the Shuar and the Ashwar do that. They drink a lot of Wayusa, which is similar to yerba mate, and they recount their dreams. And the elder, I think it's usually the woman, the grandmother.
Yeah.
She then kind of interprets them and bases the day around that.
Yeah, which is a beautiful way of weaving in unconscious and consciousness, right? Yeah. So I think dreams these are these gifts that we have that come to us for free. We don't have to pay for them. We don't have to take a course and learn how to dream. It just comes. And it's possible to practice to start to remember your dreams better. A big part of that is writing them, having the diligence to write them down right after in the morning, the minute you wake up. I mean, I have dream journals going back 30 years, like stacks and stacks of dream journals. And I have learned so much. Sometimes they're, how do I say, pre-recognition of something occasionally. Often reflections on a current situation, sometimes mysterious. It's just like ayahuasca. I think dreams kind of come from the same place that ayahuasca visions do, which is our unconscious. Which is not to discount the effect of the medicine, or the role it plays, but they're so personal, right? How everybody's visions are personal. So, what was it about dreams? What are we talking about?
I guess, like within that Jungian way, how does one work with dreams? How does one interpret them? How does one take whatever is being transmitted through that space and apply it to, we were talking about reality, but to this reality?
Yeah. Number one step, record them. And that opens the conduit so that you remember more and more, because quite often people don't remember their dreams very well. But I think you find if you start to write them down every morning that you start to remember them more and more. And this is something I've also found very handy in ayahuasca ceremonies I will say for myself, because my capacity to remember things that happened, I'm not saying 100%, it never is, but I can remember a lot of what happens in the ceremony, I think, through working on that cognizance. So you record them, and over time you start to work. Say you have an interesting dream one night and you want to work with it, so you write it down, and then you start to look at it, and I don't know, just give me a little example, something. It doesn't even have to be a real dream.
I'm battling a demon or something very scary. Maybe it's anthropomorphic, or it's somehow more ethereal, but there's
some scary figure. And
there's a fight. There's
which are common. Fight dreams are common for people. Then maybe starting to look at, okay, what is this figure that I'm battling? And you can draw it or paint it or just see it in your mind's eye. Again, it's like working with a vision from medicine, right? What are the details of it? Can I see it in present time? If I get myself into that state, can I start to engage with it? What color is his skin? Is there hair on it? What's he wearing? All the little details have information, And in that way you start to develop a relationship with it in your waking time. At night you're battling with it, but in the daytime you can start to get curious. This is the warmth and the curiosity that I was speaking of earlier, What does a demon mean for me? What are all my associations with a demon? Or let's say I dream about bacon. What does bacon mean for me? Why bacon? Why did this symbol show up in my psyche? When it could have been, I don't know, prosciutto or whatever. There are really, really interesting ways to unpack the symbolism. And if you're into etymology, which you mentioned, you would probably really enjoy the detailed aspect of dream work like that. So there are dream dictionaries, but I don't really think you can just look up your symbols and get it. But sometimes they're useful for launching a train of thought or something. Ways to hunt down the meaning of this image for you, and why did it show up for you personally. And then over time, especially with dreams, especially if you tend to have a similar series of dreams, like fighting or running away or whatever. As you start to develop a relationship with those parts of the psyche that are unconscious, the dreams can start to change. And that's not something you're doing or making happen. It's more a spontaneous reflection of the shifting relationship inside of you. So, I mean, we could talk about dreams for 2 hours, but that's a brief response.
And then the idea of doing that work is when we go back into that space, it begins to change that space, and other things can then come from that, or also it's somehow giving us a deeper understanding of our conscious reality as well, through the working with the dream space.
Yeah, because that demon dream or whatever is probably reflecting something in your current state. It may or may not be an external situation. It may be something you're carrying around from the past somewhere in your mind. Mm-hmm. And by past, I mean not just this life either, of course. Mm. But the idea being, I think number one is so satisfying to have a deeper relationship with myself. And I love the communications that go on with the part of me that knows, but I don't know that part, and then the part of me that doesn't know. It's a relationship. Mm-hmm. And for me, that just makes life fuller and richer, and it makes being human more interesting.
Yeah. So then you mentioned plant medicine a number of times. How was that journey? You mentioned like when you were younger, you had worked with some psychedelics, and then we kind of started the podcast off with, we had met working in a plant medicine center, which they predominantly work with ayahuasca, which is I'm sure most people listening are familiar with it, but it's one of the main Amazonian plants that is seen as a plant that has a deep ability to heal us, but then also a deep ability to teach us. Mm-hmm. So what was that earlier work with you with psychedelics? And then because then you went on this long journey of Tibetan Buddhism, right, of psychotherapy. And then at some point, later in your life, you found yourself again. Obviously there was some spark or curiosity to begin to learn about this other way of working as well.
Yeah. I was doing LSD when I was 15, 16, just as a seeker. I was reading Aldous Huxley and William James and being very sincere about it, watching the sunrise in the Chicago suburbs. It wasn't the best setting in many places, those Grateful Dead concerts, but there's always part of me is like, yes, I want more. I want to see more. I want to understand more, So that was in my teens and early 20s, and then obviously when I went to Asia, I wasn't running into psychedelics there for a very long period of time, and then I had children, and I was a mom, and all this, But then my kids grew up and left, and I think it was 2013 or 2014, I was in Hawaii visiting a friend, and ayahuasca arose in my field, the possibility of going to a ceremony. I'd heard of it before, I was kind of interested, but this just manifested kind of flawlessly, So I went to a ceremony. It was the only daytime ceremony I've done so far. It was in the daytime with somebody who I think had roots in Daime and had a vast amount of experience. And wow, it was so, I don't know what to say. It was so strange. It was so unlike anything I had ever met or encountered before. I really met the plant that day, and she met me, and we had exchanges and communications. And I remember thinking afterwards, I don't know if I'm going to do that again. It was just so bizarre. But I went back to Portland, and ayahuasca circle immediately arose in my circle of friends. It was just manifesting for me. And I started drinking ayahuasca in the States, working with it myself. It was such a profound and deep and balancing and meaningful experience for me. Because I'd done so much work with the Dharma and meditation and clearing my mind and stuff like that. But I was also sitting on a mountain of stuff from the past. Early trauma. Some things I had known about, some things I hadn't known about, the medicine showed me over time. And I embarked on this process of clearing and cleaning and purging, realizing more and more of, oh my God, that happened too. Which is, I mean, it's shocking, and it's disillusioning, but it's also quite liberating, I found, to realize that, oh my God, I've been carrying these memories around my whole life in my body, but I never could see them. And that explains this. That explains why I see myself as a child in photos. I'm always like slumped and just not a happy child, let's say. So ayahuasca really started to engage me, and at the same time I started to feel like my private practice in Portland was coming to an end. I just knew I wasn't going to be sitting in that chair anymore for much longer, watching the person on the sofa, But I didn't know what was going to come next. So I gave myself a year off. I closed my practice. Went to Nepal, went to India, visited, came back, and then I went to Peru with a one-way ticket. Because I wanted to meet the medicine in one of her homelands, and I could see that there were things waiting for me here that I didn't know yet. And the medicine was very clear with me. It's like, I got the message. I'm going to be taken care of. It's all going to work out. But I'm not going to get to know what it is yet. And what it told me was the ship has to leave the harbor before the wind can fill the sails. Which is a beautiful image, a metaphor, right? I had to leave everything. I mean, I kept it, but I left it, right? And come here before the next act could get rolling. So within a week or 2 weeks of coming to Peru, I'd contacted Matthew at the temple, and we were talking about working together around developing integration things. And I came to the Sacred Valley 2 weeks into being in Peru, and the minute I got to Pisac, it was like, within a few days I knew I had to stay. Just all the synchronicities and the messages I was getting. It was like, I say it's like plugging into an electrical socket. It's the way I felt, just like, whoa, something was so grounding for me here, and still is. That's why I'm here. It's just 6-7 years later, yeah. And part of it is the medicine, but part is also the energy of the Sacred Valley and this place and the apus and the spirits that are here and the mountains, which obviously I love and have a connection with. Yeah, so that's how I connected with Peru and ayahuasca.
I'm just going to lower this a little.
I can see why.
What was that like when you began to work with ayahuasca? Because I think so many people who come to it, it's kind of like, in a way, their first endeavor into doing something like that, whether it's working with plant medicines or a deep self-inquiry process. But for you had all of this background in Tibetan Buddhism and psychotherapy. So what was that initial experience like for you? The initial experiences, did you feel like it was just kind of taking what you had learned and taking it to a different level, or it was just completely different? And you mentioned this word strange.
The first time was strange, and indeed it's all still very strange, but you get used to strange after a while. I felt like the medicine was really happy to be working in my body. The first time, it was like, I met the medicine and it met me, and I felt like it was inside exploring all my channels, how it moves through the whole body, and it was like, wow, this is cool. That there was a lot of openness or awareness in there, that it could collaborate with, or I could collaborate with. I don't know how to say. And I don't know what I would have made of it had I met the medicine in my 20s. Obviously, I didn't. I was, I think, 55 my first journey. And I'm just so grateful for all the work that I did before that made it more comprehensible, perhaps slightly easier. And so in that sense, it was an accelerator of my process, which was already pretty functional. But as I said, it covered a lot of ground that I was not aware of. Just going straight down on the unconscious and bringing up stuff that needed to be integrated. And that is something I give ayahuasca great credit for, and I have great reverence towards it from that perspective. I just see how it goes down right down to the root of your being, in my case the first chakra, and starts to bring up stuff from the unconscious. And when I do integration sessions with people, because I work as an integration therapist now, I'm always hearing about how the medicine's working with their system and what it's choosing to start with. And so interesting to note that, yeah, it usually has something to do with their intention, not in a way they expected, but still. And also, it seems to be going down and bringing up stuff that they were not aware of. Or they were aware of it perhaps in one way, but they're like, oh yeah, that happened. And perhaps the impact of what happened was much bigger than they recognized.
You mentioned this idea, and I think it's really interesting that, like, your meditative practices were working like on this level, and then when you began to drink ayahuasca, it started going on all this other level, and it's something I've seen, and it's obviously it's a generalization, it's a stereotype, but it does seem like a pattern I've noticed is very often people, when they have a very kind of maybe intensive meditative practice, they can be very skilled in one area, but there is a disconnect from other things. And often it's almost like a wall or a ceiling where it's like really hard for them to penetrate through that. And my sense is kind of, like anything, it doesn't have to be through meditation, but anything, if we get so ingrained in any particular thing, then that's kind of how we begin to see the world. And if something comes along and shakes that, it's almost like, I'm not sure if I want to go there, because that's going to completely redefine then how I potentially look at the world.
Right. And I think that does exist to an extent, whoa, this is going to shatter my paradigm, and that will be very inconvenient. Although if your commitment to growth or healing is deep enough, you learn to give that up. Because every time you drink ayahuasca, it shatters your paradigm, right? But I also think it's not just a conceptual kind of block, like what you're talking about, but quite often there is trauma buried around here or here or here, and that the blockages that creates or causes is not just a head thing of resistance, or I don't want to redefine that, but an actual instinctive, perhaps old survival reflex that's in there. Like, I can't feel this, is perhaps what that person was thinking when they were a baby, or 4 or 12 or whatever. I can't afford to feel this because it will overwhelm me and I will die. And it's this amazing gift we have, paradoxical gift with a curse, as humans, to be able to compartmentalize, to be able to seal away unbearable experiences so that we can continue to grow up and survive. But then quite often, somewhere around the age of 29 or 35 or 42 or whatever, we get to a wall where it's like, I can't do what I'm doing anymore. I need to turn inside and start to see what's in there. And I think that kind of work I won't say it requires it, but it's more easily done, more gracefully done if we have that kind of commitment. I want to see, I want to know, I want to heal, I want to release this. Not just, I'm sitting on my cushion meditating and, something pops up. Which does happen too, of course, just in meditation, right? Sometimes people have tremendous experiences of stuff coming up from their practice. But if you're a long-term practitioner, you probably got it down. So it's nicely sealed away.
That seems like a really important point too, which seems like something a lot of us might not want to admit, but that the medicine is part of the experience, but we can never remove ourselves. And a huge part of ourselves, as you said, is like, do I really want this? It's one thing to show up and maybe to verbally say, like, I want this, but on a really deep level, like, is this something I really want?
Yeah, it's hard to know, especially when we're talking about ayahuasca or other medicines again. What is it I'm asking for?
Mm-hmm.
I want to be free of anxiety. I hear that as people's intentions. Okay, what does that really mean? The medicine offers them a lot more than they bargained for, a lot more than they expected. And I mean, this is one reason I bow to it and I love it, because it's so powerful and so extreme and so Vajrayana, so limitless, But it's also certainly not for everybody. And I think that process of coming to commitment within yourself around, yes, I want to release this. Yes, I want to be free of this. That takes time. And that can take many journeys and different plants too. Because dieta is another way I've found to really get to that point. And you can still have moments of doubt and like, oh shit, why did I say that? In ceremony. Like it comes on so intensely. It's like, why am I doing this?
Can you talk more about that example you use? Like someone comes and they say, okay, I want to get rid of anxiety. And ayahuasca then gives them more than they bargained for. What is like an archetypical way? Obviously, the experiences can be so varied, but what is maybe an example of a way where ayahuasca may give them more than they asked for, or take it in a direction that's potentially getting at that, but that's seen or experienced in a very different way?
Yeah. So first of all, if somebody wants to get rid of their anxiety, I'm always a little suspicious because you can't get rid of something that's in you. It's more like, I totally understand not wanting to live with anxiety all the time, and that can be a good intention. But from what I have seen and what I hear from people, if somebody goes in with an intention, I want to be free from fear, I want to be free from anxiety, they are probably going to have a very intense experience of anxiety and or fear in that ceremony, because ayahuasca, as I said, can go down to the root and start to pull that up. And the root is in the unconscious, and it can be in experiences that you do not remember. And it can be, especially if these experiences are when you're a baby or pre-verbal before the age of 2 or even a small child, they're going to be chaotic and terrifying and overwhelming, because that's what that baby or that small child experienced. That baby had no way of saying, I'm all alone and my parents aren't here and I'm crying really hard, or many worse things happen, right, to babies. So it's just so fragmented, and then afterwards the person is left with, what the heck was that? But I always think of something Gabor Mate said, which was people come to him and say, I felt things I never felt before on ayahuasca. And he's like, oh yeah, you did feel these before. You just don't remember it. It's buried somewhere in your past. And I always tell people, the medicine's not doing this to hurt you. It's not doing this to harm you, although I understand it can be really, really difficult and scary, but it is in the interest of cleaning it out and bringing it to your awareness. And can you start to piece together what might have happened then? It's not totally necessary to have all the pieces, but it can help the mind, And can you start to work with your body and your nervous system, perhaps in some trauma healing ways, I've trained in somatic experiencing. It's one modality I practice, although I don't practice it long term. Often I'm referring people out to therapists who work with trauma in the body, with the idea of helping to release some of this stuff that ayahuasca's brought up, because the medicine will bring it up, but it doesn't usually remove the whole experience, right? Maybe occasionally you've heard of people like, whoo, the whole thing was taken from me in one ceremony, but that's pretty rare, right? Usually you're left with the halfway thing of like, I dumped it in my lap and now what do I do? And that's what integration is, right?
You mentioned this idea, which I think is really important, and before we started rolling, we were speaking a bit of this guy, Amika, because we both sat a little bit in the ceremonies. And one thing that I think is really beautiful is there's this story. It's funny, I have this mambe in my mouth, and it's a little hard to talk. But there's this story of in his lineage, in his line, they say that the the spirit or the essence of humans like arrived in what he would call the primordial anaconda canoe. And interestingly, it also had all of these medicines. And that there's actually an order, like that his people would work with these medicines. First was actually tobacco, and then mambe, ambil, murundi, which is like rape. And then there was the medicines, I forget the particular word, but it was things like peyote, wachuma, things that really kind of open our, maybe one could say, like our sensory perceptions, like to this reality, to what we can experience with just these senses. And then beyond that, there's datura, toei, they call it, I think, borrachera, like the medicine that makes you really, really drunk. And then beyond that, there's, I think you would translate it as like the queens of knowledge, which for them is jemaru, which is marijuana, yopo, which is kind of similar to ayahuasca, but it's orally taken, or, yeah, I believe it's orally taken, and not orally, nasally, yeah. And ayahuasca, yahe. And those are kind of the queens of knowledge, which they would say can take us to dimensions beyond this dimension. Yeah. And a lot of profound teaching can arise from that. But it's interesting because, you know, in a way, all of those are complete medicines, but they're all different. Like they have a different place and they have a different time, and they're used for specific things. So if one person is sick with this, they may get this plant. If they're sick with this, they would work with this plant. And so in that way, because you mentioned that too, you know, you mentioned that there's many plants and that you know, each of those plants has an ability. Do you see any pattern for, much like you were mentioning with meditation, like there's a beauty to it. It works on very specific things, and you experienced a lot of benefit. And then you found ayahuasca, which you found began to work on other things. We also had the blessing to work with Iboga together, and I mean, for me, that's just a kind of without words. It's a masterful plant. But do you sense, you know, like for example, like ayahuasca, that there are things that it's very beneficial for, and maybe other plants that you've worked with that you find could be potentially good for other things?
Wow. That's a great question. I haven't thought about it, but I'll speak for what comes to mind most immediately. About ayahuasca, San Pedro, Iboga. Those are three that come to mind.
Tobacco, you've also
well, certainly in Mapacho,
with,
yeah, sure, yeah. All right, let's start with Mapacho then. It was the first plant in the canoe, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so glad they were in the canoe with our primordial ancestors. So yes, I've dieted Mapacho, and we've worked with the same tabaquera, and in the course of plant dietas. And wow, I have such respect for Mapacho. I have such respect for all these plants, but Mapacho for cleaning and strengthening and straightening the inner channels and the emotional body. I was drinking it a month or so ago, and I was just feeling all over again how it's righteous. The energy of Mapacho is so righteous, right? It just puts you on this earth in your body as a human, no more and no less. It connects you, or it connects me where I need to be connected. It shows me if I'm screwing up in any way. I think you have a podcast about Mapacho that's apparently quite eloquent. So, and you have much more experience with it than I do. So yeah, but so Mapacho to set your feet on the path. I kind of like that, huh? But I'm a fan of drinking it, not just smoking it. And I, if anybody is going to drink it, I would suggest they do it under supervision of an experienced tabaquero like yourself. Ayahuasca for emotional stuff, the emotional body. Ayahuasca for bringing past traumas to light. It's a tricky one, you know, because it's not as clear as either Iboga or San Pedro, for that matter. Maybe that's why it's the furthest out in the canoe. And it takes some interpretation, and it takes some perhaps experience or skill to journey through it successfully. I don't know if that's the right word, but without too much confusion or trauma. But again, it's something I have a very deep connection with, and I'm so grateful to. Ayahuasca for cleaning too, of course. It has the whole purgative component, and sometimes I gather it's drunk in the jungle just for the purge, because it's what people need. San Pedro Huachuma, which I just connected with a few days ago again for the first time in a long time. Wow. For seeing the beauty of the world, the Garden of Eden that we all live in. For seeing God in all his or her many, many forms. And also for connecting with the masculine. For me, I find it a very masculine plant, and the first time I met it, it cleaned out my father, my grandfathers, my whole male lineage all the way back, and I'd never known what it was like to be in a human body with a clean male lineage, but San Pedro, boom, showed me that. So sometimes I recommend to men I know that would be a good plant for them to drink. I mean, for women too, I love it, but something particularly masculine about its strength. And Iboga, because it's so clear, there's nothing like it, and so powerful, and as you said, it gets beyond words. But one thing I really clearly saw in my experiences with Iboga was how it can work with addiction. Because man, it just showed me my stuff like this, relentless, like a dog getting his nose rubbed in its poop. And it would not let up. I had to take it in so deeply, the disgusting aspects of my behavior, and these were not, I'm not addicted to substances or anything. It was a different kind of thing. It was showing me mental patterns that I was trapped in, fear and trauma, basically. But man, is that powerful, and I can totally see how if you have an addiction issue and you come to Iboga, and I don't know about ibogaine, it's a whole different thing, right? It's a chemical, and I'm talking about the plant. But if you were to come to Iboga in an appropriate setting with the right support, that you could develop such disgust for whatever substance abuse you might be doing that you would never, ever want to do that again. Does that resonate for you?
That's beautiful, yeah. Yeah, thank you for showing that. Yeah, I found that very fascinating with Iboga too. It was the death ceremony, and it was very fascinating. It was all of these mental patterns that were like, I thought they were done with.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were still there.
Yeah,
and
me
yet
too.
I realized they were still lingering, you know.
Yeah.
And it was incessant. It was repetitive. There was no way of, like you said, it was just right there.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating just seeing those, and not just seeing them. It was experiencing them ad infinitum. You know, just.
Yeah. It showed me definitely how things I thought I had cleared out, the root was still there. I'd cut off the top of the plant with certain therapeutic strategies and methods and EMDR and stuff like that, but there's still a root there. Yeah. I don't know. Ayahuasca goes really deep too. I can't compare, you know. They both go deep, but in different ways. But I don't know anything that could go deeper than Iboga, because it has that infinite Vajra quality. Yeah.
Yeah, for me also there was something very infinite about it. It just incomprehensible. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of respect for that plant. What was that like for you, arriving in a center where they're working with ayahuasca and beginning to incorporate, you know, all of your knowledge, and what was that process like of finding like where they meet and what are the similarities? Because you know, I would imagine it's also a fine dance of like, because I think the more we work with these other modalities, you know, and again, correct me if you don't agree, but there's something that's seen that's at the root of all of these that they're pointing towards. And so how to take these things, and much like you said, like any of these plants has its purpose, it has its use, but there may be blind spots, there may be things where it's not addressing. So taking these other modalities, and maybe I can help to aid in some of those other things.
Right.
So what is that process like? And then at the same time, like, I would imagine there's a sense of being mindful of, like, not to kind of cross too far and, like, overwhelm the thing they're working with as well. Right,
exactly, yeah. Because on a medicine retreat, like the 3-week program at the temple that I was working at, they have a number of ceremonies, and it's an unfolding process, and the medicine is working even when you're not drinking the ceremony, of course, the way I looked at it was, there are so many practices that can be complementary to integration and support integration. And integration is a very vague word, so maybe I should talk about that first. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of buzz about integration in the ayahuasca world and in the psychedelic world. We all know we should integrate. Not that many people are really clear on how do I integrate? What does that mean? So some things I like to say about that. Integration, and one of my definitions is integration is the process of assimilating, of ingesting, of digesting the material and the messages that came up for you in ceremony or in your work with psychedelics. The messages, the information, sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. But how do you take that gift or the gifts that you've received and start to bring them into yourself so that they become real in the world? And that is not just a talk circle after a ceremony. Like, talk circles are great. But sometimes I talk to people and they're like, oh yeah, we did an integration circle. It's like, check. I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, a talk circle is one integration practice. There are so many practices, right? Journaling, spending time in nature, dream work, I list as an integration practice. Just paying attention to your dreams. I have a list of 17 ways to integrate PDF on my website. I'm not seeing it all right now, but these are modalities. Working with your emotions, working with your body, starting to bring your consciousness more down into your body is often a big integration practice for people who are quite dissociated. Sometimes integration for people, for especially the beginning, is just about cleaning up your life, right? And the medicine will tell you, or you just realize, I can't eat junk food anymore, I gotta quit smoking weed, can't drink, I've heard all these stories, can't drink alcohol. Me, it was like I had to quit swearing, and it's still difficult, but the medicine was really clear. You can't say those words anymore. It's not the right vibration, wear this color, listen to this music, we get these messages, and all that I lump into the category of how to build a sane life, which can be the basis for your ongoing growth then. So anyway, all these tasks, missions, aspects of integration, but what you need as an individual is unique for you. I can't ever tell anybody, here's your integration recipe, write in your journal, take a walk in nature every day, and meditate. Because they might need something totally different, right? So that's something I found really wonderful at the temple, and I'm continuing it in my work as an integration therapist, and also with this integration course that I've put together, an online program, is drawing on all the modalities that I know, all the tools I have in my toolkit from 20, 30 years of working in different ways, and bringing them to the ayahuasca world and being able to offer them to people and say, hey, here's how you can work with that dark figure you saw in your ceremony. Here's some ideas for shadow work, right? Or here's some ideas for internal family systems or voice dialogue, parts work on the inside. Or sounds to me like you could really use some trauma healing work in the body. And I recommend somatic experiencing for that. Or, it's so dependent on the individual, because as Rick Doblin says, Rick Doblin, the director of MAPS, he says this with LSD, he says, you're not just having an LSD experience, it's LSD in conjunction with your psyche. And I just take that with ayahuasca. There's never one ayahuasca experience that everybody has, right? It's working in conjunction with your psyche. So every single ceremony you've had is different than anybody else's ceremony. in the whole world in all time, even though there may be elements where somebody says, yeah, I saw that too, or whatever. It's still drawing on what you have uniquely inside of you. So integration is completely unique for each person, which is why it's hard to, break it down into a 3-step formula. But on the other hand, that makes it so rich. What does this person need for support? What does this person need at this time? And what you need, it changes over time, right, with your work. But I just really believe in the power and the significance of really integrating what we receive, so that when we go back and receive more, we have the capacity. Otherwise, it can be like pouring medicine down your throat. I had a vision once in ceremony, and it was not pleasant, of all of us laying around like babies going, give me more, give me more. It was very humbling.
With your work as a therapist and also working with people who've worked with plant medicines, do you see, I completely agree, and I think it's a super important point, is that, no person's experience will ever be the same as someone else, and that's super fundamentally important. Do you see would you say, like, common archetypes of why people are coming down, what they're looking to work with, and then when they're finished, this idea of integration, like, how they can take what they've experienced and integrate it? And also, like, are there common things that you see that are happening in that plant medicine space? Common things that when people reach out to you, you see, like, these are the issues that come up that need to be integrated.
Right. And there's a lot of questions packed into that, so please help me bookmark those. First of all, I will say that, ayahuasca is all over the world, underground ceremonies, and I get calls from people in Ireland and Russia and Australia and whatever too, so it's not just people working here, it's all over the place and growing exponentially every year. I see people going to the medicine looking so you said I said, and then you reiterated that everybody's experience is different. But still, there's a fair amount of people who read about somebody's experience, or they hear about it on YouTube, and they kind of go expecting to have something in that vein. I'm going to have beautiful visions or whatever, and then they have something very different. And that's not surprising, right? But it can be disturbing for them. Why didn't I get what the other person had? Because you don't have that person's psyche. And I will also, in that vein, I will say that people who contact me usually have something disturbing or difficult that they want some support with. Confusing, perplexing, or upsetting. Sometimes it's people who just want to make the most of their ceremony, and I totally applaud that too. I think that I can absolutely work with that. But often I'm getting the trauma-heavier cases, right? Which are probably not an accurate percentage representation of what actually happens. Because many people just have beautiful, beautiful ceremonies. But then sometimes they have beautiful ceremonies run out, and then they have a terrible one, and they're like, what went wrong? I'm like, well, you're starting to hit the nitty-gritty now, People, anxiety, depression, the common plagues of the Western world, especially higher and higher incidence with young people, especially nowadays with COVID and stuff, disrupting things. But I think, just general research shows that people under 30 are feeling more alienated, more depressed, more anxious, more disconnected. Perhaps it's due to the advent of the cell phone and stuff like that. Whether or not they turn to plant medicine for that. But there's many people who don't want to do conventional medications, and good for that, So they turn to plant medicine, hearing that can help, not necessarily realizing that it's not just taking the plant medicine that helps, it's the whole process that it puts you into, of really starting to work with what are these feelings, where do they come from. I really hate the word depression in a way, because people use it for all sorts of things. Just, I'm not feeling good. I'm depressed.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me crazy. And I used to ask people as a therapist, okay, tell me about how this feels. What's the nature of this depression? And quite often they're angry, or they're sad, or they're afraid, or they're in a difficult life situation. That's not depression.
Mm-hmm.
That's other things that you need to work with. But the label of depression, and then the idea it's a chemical imbalance in the brain that you take a pill to cure, which frankly has never been proven, is it's in the popular understanding now. And I think it distorts people's sense of their own capacity and responsibility for responding to and working with their actual state of being, which again is something I got from meditation. It's like whatever I'm feeling, I bring it to the cushion and I feel it, right? There's something else about integration, but what was it?
Yeah, kind of that similar idea of I mean, you kind of answered it, but the things that people are coming to then integrate that back into their lives. So, I mean, I think as you mentioned, the anxiety, the depression, the difficult experiences. Are there kind of archetypical experiences that you see that people have where, again, they label them as very difficult or bad or not good? That you find like those are really challenging things that somehow ayahuasca is revealing to them?
Yeah, and I've had my own too, Archetypes are shared. Yeah, I mean, the death thing. I'm dying. I'm going crazy. My body's completely dissolving sometimes for people, which can be super scary. Occasionally, the archetypal paranoid experience of this is a cult. That probably we've all had a few times somewhere along the way, and you got to work through that too. Archetypes that come up. But I mean, there's also the other side of the mother coming to you and holding you in her arms or whatever, or connecting with the earth or the planet in a deeper way than you ever imagined that was possible, or seeing the beauty of creation, or the love that you have for a particular person, seeing that just shining, right? Those are all archetypal experiences too. So I don't mean to say it's all dark, although I kind of specialize in working with the dark because that's what people reach out for. But similarly, the beautiful experiences, you can work to integrate those. How do you take that more deeply into your being? That vision that you had of the planet or of your partner or whatever, how do you really weave that into your life so you're acting from the place of knowing that? At least more often. I won't say in every moment, but more often, yeah.
Do you think a big part is, you mentioned this idea, it's something I find, which is, you mentioned this idea of like intention and expectation, and I think so many of us, we often, if someone reaches the point where they're coming down, paying all this money, taking off work, leaving family, going to a foreign country, like obviously they have a sense that something is missing or not quite right, or there's something they want to learn, there's something they need to heal. So obviously that felt sense is there. But then this, also this idea that, it seems to me often the way these medicines have to work in a way is bypassing the mind that thinks it knows. Because in a sense, if we already had the answers, that doesn't necessarily mean we would put them into practice, but we probably wouldn't then be going to the jungle or something to look for answers. So, in a way, it seems like these things have to, not always, but especially some of these more difficult things, it has to bypass the mind. And in that idea of expectation, like it has to bypass the expectation to shake us so that we can actually get to these things,
The expectations have nothing to do with it, right? They're just an artificial false layer on top.
Yeah.
But you were going somewhere with that.
Yeah, so when these experiences happen, and I think that's also where a lot of this idea of like trust in the medicine, trust in the process. Now, that's not to say you can just take the medicine and trust. You know, there are a lot of things that go around that. The setting, who are you working with, the tradition, like, is it a space that's conducive to that? Are there not good things happening?
Should you trust it, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or can you?
Yeah. But saying, you know, let's say you're in a good space, it's being done well, and then this experience comes up, which, you know, the person is labeling as bad, and they obviously need help with that. Do you think a huge part is just having that person, like, almost that role of like a shaman, of being able to work with that person and simply put that thing in context with them? Because if we don't have it in context, you know, the mind can take it to all sorts of different directions. Yeah. And just simply, you know, having someone to reflect that off of and like putting it in context, like saying, no, like I've seen this before, this is what's happening. This, in an ultimate sense, it's good. It's bringing up something. It may not feel good right now, but it's, like, I can see, or I have a sense of, like, this is what it's trying to draw. Yep. And that, you know, even something like that can be extremely healing for someone, because if that's not there, then the trauma is just kind of, it's just sitting there. There's nowhere for it to go.
Right, you're in a black void and there's no meaning, and I feel meaning is such a healing element for humans. We are meaning-making creatures. We're always seeking to make meaning. Sometimes we'll make a dark meaning out of a difficult ceremony. But as I also said, I don't believe ayahuasca messes with us. I mean, sometimes. Sometimes, but I don't believe that these dark experiences are usually there just to torment us or torture us. They're there for a reason. You know, they come up for a reason, and that reason is on the path of healing and integration. So for the person just to hear your sense of it, I think, or my sense of it after the fact, can be tremendously reassuring and help them get off that anxiety cliff. I've seen that. Suddenly they're sleeping better. Suddenly they can just, But I also, you know, people sometimes beat themselves up because I couldn't trust it. I fought against it. I couldn't surrender. And I'm like, look, trust comes with time, right? And trust comes from experience. If I just met you, Jason, on the street and I trusted you, it would be a little foolish, right? It takes time, it takes conversations.
You'd be more than a little foolish, yeah.
I'd be more than a little foolish, perhaps. But it takes, repeated interactions to build trust. And I see that with medicine, too. Sometimes we can, borrow a bit of trust in a way because we trust the person who's serving us. Like with the tabaquera we work with, you know, like, man, I trust him so much. It got me through so many difficult experiences. Because, like, okay, if he tells me I can do this, I can do this. You know what I'm talking about. So sometimes the trust comes from what we read about shipibos or whatever, you know, it can come a bit from that. But, I always tell people, don't blame yourself for not trusting. You cannot fabricate trust, just like you can't fabricate forgiveness. Those are two things that have to arise authentically. And trust comes from experience, as far as I've seen, and forgiveness comes from grace. But, I also see people just, I did it wrong, beating up on themselves. I had bad ceremony, it must mean I'm a bad person. Not directly saying that, but that's the underlying context, and I think that is so embedded in the framework of past trauma that when bad things happen to us as babies or children, we take it on, we take it in. We can't say, my father's bad for doing that, because that would just be too terrifying. So I must be bad because he's doing that to me, right? And that becomes woven into our being, and that is one of the remarkable things I find about working with ayahuasca in particular, is that it brings up and shows me trauma from the past and all the feelings it's created inside my body. And boy, those don't feel good. But over time, I have started to be able to differentiate, that's what happened. And this is me, and this is my soul. And also the plants of Dieta have really helped refine that process. So and it's an ongoing process, but to start to be able to see all those bad feelings, I thought I was that, that's not really true. I'm just another human on this earth. And I can be as clean as a tree or a plant or whatever I'm drinking. That's part of the process of Dieta for me, is just growing like a tree, right? Towards the light. Yeah. So that is something I'm tremendously grateful to plants for, that I did not find in either psychotherapy or Buddhism to this extent. At the same time, it worked with all my past experiences in those. For me, it's kind of like, boom, the final touch. I can't say that plants are the only way to get there, but it's something I really honor from them.
It seems like there's a lot of discussion now, specifically about trauma and how these plants have a tremendous, certain plants have a tremendous ability to help with that. Do you think, because I often find, and I think you said it really well with Iboga, like for addiction, Iboga seems, because of the way it works, to be very beneficial for that. But it also seems to me that's not the root of what Iboga is doing. It's kind of a byproduct.
Right,
it's an amazing byproduct.
Right.
And it's something that should be used and studied and worked with.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a similar thing with ayahuasca, is that that's not inherently the root of it, but it's an amazing byproduct? Or do you think that's part of the process? I mean, obviously, we all have trauma. It's that kind of primordial Buddhist concept of there is suffering, and we have this Buddha nature. There's also a way out if we're willing to go into that. I guess the question is, with ayahuasca, do you think because again, there's so much talk now about trauma and how beneficial ayahuasca can be. Do you think that's just like an inherent part of the process of what working with ayahuasca is, and something everyone has to go through? And what do you think then, if that is the case, like what is actually then the medicine trying to get at? I know there's a huge question and it's very personal, but do you sense that, beyond all of these layers, and these layers, you can't bypass them,
right.
They're there. There's a reason they're there. But do you sense there's something kind of encompassing all of that as well, that's also there to be experienced?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I'm not sure I would say it's just a byproduct of it, this kind of cleaning process, rewiring process that happens in our energetic and emotional bodies through. It's not a byproduct, but I don't think it's the end goal either. Clearly it's embedded in there are concentric rings of larger and larger contexts, can I say, or visions, or I'm not sure what the word is, and it seems like, and again, this is from my perspective, my personal perspective of work and the work I do as an integration therapist. It seems like many Western people start off with, clean up your life, stop doing these bad things, here's what happened to you in the past, showing you so you can release it, cleaning out these old feelings from our body. And some people don't have hardly anything at that level, right? They don't have a lot of trauma. Good for them. They had good upbringing, stable support, secure attachment, not a lot of difficult things. I'm always amazed when I meet people like that. It's like, wow, what a blessing. Because I don't meet people like that in my practice, but still, it can happen, But then as the rings start to get larger, it's like, there are larger contexts to work in. And I don't mean to say all the work with ayahuasca is just about the person, right? There's collective levels, there's ancestral levels, there's karmic levels, there's extraterrestrial levels. There's many different dimensions of it. So, this is not a byproduct, it's part, but it's by no means the only thing. But it's kind of what we're focusing on today.
Yeah. You mentioned like the difference between iboga and ibogaine, and iboga being the plant worked with in its entirety. It's the shavings of the root of the bark of a plant. And then with that, there's all sorts of other things that come along with that: tradition, ceremony, ritual.
Right. And then ibogaine, which is delivered in a clinic in Mexico, and pill. I don't know if it's pill or intravenous or whatever, but I don't know. But it just strikes me as a very different thing.
I know one of the interesting things you've done is you've begun to work. You've trained yourself in kind of also this realm of I guess it could be called psychedelic assisted therapy, or but this idea of working with things that may not be in the way we would look at things is like a traditional way of practice.
Sure.
So this kind of more something that in a way seems like a natural evolution, and a big part of that is psychotherapy. Like that component, which is actually a very traditional way of working, which is like the guide, the facilitator, like someone to sit there and like, and I imagine that's very similar to your practice. But what do you think? What do you think is the direction that that's moving in, and what do you think are the pros of that and the cons of that? Because obviously all of these plants, they come from a tradition, they come from a time, a place, a very particular context. And yet so much of the way this work is moving in the world is through this more Western kind of mentality of, okay, well, how do we reduce this to the most simple thing possible, which is usually the chemical, the alkaloid,
Right.
and apply that and
Right.
and have it work.
Yeah.
And it seems like it is working, to some degree, like there is benefit from it. But
how would that translate in the context of ayahuasca, of course, is a very good question.
Also very different.
And
yeah.
the whole juncture between psychedelics and plants. Okay, there's all these words, right? Entheogenic, whatever, but chemical or plant is a thing too. So I've taken the MAPS training for psychedelic MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for severe PTSD, and we're still waiting for approval from the FDA, but it's in the works. It'll happen. COVID slowed things down, but there's such a need for successful treatments for PTSD, which causes so much suffering, and the clinical results of these trials that they've painstakingly put on are amazing. So MDMA-assisted psychotherapy can be incredible, and I look forward to the day when that can be administered freely. I think
if I remember correctly, it was 2 out of 3 people were cured of their PTSD.
Oh yeah, at least a 66% rate or something. Yeah,
which is incredible.
It is incredible because there's nothing. Exposure therapy doesn't do that. Not at all. So I saw this a few years ago. There's this huge wave coming into the West. I'll speak as an American because I'm an American therapist. Huge wave of psychedelics coming in. It's the second round of what happened in the 60s. There was lots of research actually in the 60s, not just free love and experimentation, but lots of scientific research on psychedelics that all ended in the 70s with Nixon. And then it was all dormant for whatever period of time. And now you've seen all the headlines, it's coming on full steam ahead because we need this. So psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, which I don't know much about, but it's already approved because it's legal. Other potentially some LSD-assisted therapy going to be coming online, and I think in 10 years, the landscape's going to be very different. So I find it really exciting to be part of this, to be on this frontier. At the same time, I look at a plant like ayahuasca that's so nuanced and so tricky in some ways and so mysterious. There's a quote by somebody, a writer, who talks about the dark light of Onishuma, the dark light of ayahuasca. And that just describes it so perfectly for me. It has light, but it's not daylight like San Pedro. It's dark, yeah. So I don't ever really see that being boiled down to pill form and administered. I know they did some trials in Spain with freeze-dried ayahuasca in capsule form.
Because isn't MAPS trying to do that?
I don't think MAPS is working with ayahuasca.
Okay.
It's complex.
Yeah.
I think they might have some psilocybin possibilities. Psilocybin is much more straight's It's not a mixture. It's not cooked. It's just ground up, and it's not traditionally used in contexts. It's quite an elaborate. Could be a simple system, but it's very un-Western to sit around together in a group and drink a brew and stay up all night and maybe sing or maybe go off and puke or whatever. So given the understanding in the psychedelic world that set and setting are so important, set being the mindset, the attitude, and setting being the ambiance, the environment, I think that applies in spades for ayahuasca. I haven't heard of any clinical trials coming up to explore the clinical administration of ayahuasca. I think there's a place for it. I think there's a need for it. I know there are so many underground ceremonies already. I look forward to the day when they can be above ground. And what I would really like to see is that it can be administered in some kind of community context. I mean, there's a place for one-on-one ceremonies too, for sure. But that ayahuasca is such a community maker. And that's something I see about the attraction of it for people in the States is, suddenly I have a tribe. I have people who I share deep experiences with. And that can be half the medicine for people right there because everybody's so lonely and alienated, right? So I like to see it in some kind of community or group setting with some kind of spiritual element. Santo Daime might have some, I'm not saying in the Daime context, but that's kind of what they do. There might be things to learn from that. But I would also like to see it provided or combined with really good integrative support, long-term. I mean, this is the ideal. Long-term integrative support, and in particular, support for healing trauma, because that's not just a matter of a few sessions, either drinking medicine or getting somatic experiencing. Trauma takes time to heal. And a real understanding of what trauma is and how it impacts the nervous system and how that shows up in medicine work, and how we can, with skillful work and skillful integrative work and skillful medicine work, the two can go together over time. That's a pretty high vision. It's not easily administered. There's not a lot of money to be made from it, so I think psilocybin will take the lead. There's already companies trying to patent aspects of psilocybin therapy, and the idea being you can just go take a pill, sit with a therapist, go off. I don't see ayahuasca being like that. But I also think there's room for all sorts of modalities and plants and chemicals, for that matter. And it's super exciting to be on the frontier.
So you think, I know it's hard to predict, but you think like within a decade, these things will be much more prevalent and accepted?
Psilocybin and MDMA, in legal contexts. They're already working in Oregon on the format for legal psilocybin therapy. We voted it in Oregon. They just got to set up a structure. And Françoise Bourzat, have you heard of her? She's a French woman who lives in California, and she's trained with the Mazatec Indians and the mushroom tradition for a very long time. She's helping to develop the Oregon program. So I have hopes it'll be really thoughtful and quality. And then that Oregon program will probably serve as a model for other places. So yay, Oregon.
Now, what do you think? I mean, like, for example, I don't know her background. Is she a psychotherapist, or is she just she trained with?
She has a PhD in something.
Okay.
I don't exactly know her background, but she is very experienced and very wise, and she has a connection with an indigenous tradition that goes back a long way in her own personal history. So she strikes me as, this may not be true, but there's a whole bunch of underground guides. And I honestly don't know if she ever did that or not, but there are people like her who are doing that, who've been serving psychedelic medicines for 30, 40 years and learning a lot from that. And there's a lot of wisdom there.
It seems to parallel a little bit yoga, because it was and it still is, I think, something that people take sides on, and this idea of like, should one be certified in yoga? Should there be like a centralized body that authoritates? Is that a word? Authorizes? Like, who can teach yoga? Who can't? What are the requirements? And on the one hand, I see that as very good, much like we do with medical doctors. Like, there's a process to go through, and then eventually you get a piece of paper saying, like, you are qualified because you've done X, Y, and Z. And yet, on the other hand, I think about, I studied Ashtanga yoga for a while, and I studied with two teachers, but one was in Colorado, this guy Richard Freeman and his wife Mary. And he's not authorized. And yet he has probably in the US the deepest wisdom of that tradition. He's been doing it for the longest time.
Exactly, and he probably studied in India for a very long time and got direct transmission or empowerments. Yeah. A few thoughts on that. And there's a lot of discussion on that. You know, is it going to be limited to people with a license like me? Which would be quite... Because many people who are practicing underground or whatever, they're not necessarily trained in some above ground thing, but they have a huge amount of wisdom and experience. What I know of the MAPS training for MDMA, they're looking at one licensed person on the team of therapists, but the other person could be a body worker or an acupuncturist or, you know, somebody, a clergy member or whatever. You know, they don't have to be a licensed therapist, a person with a sincere interest in learning this. And also with the Oregon model, they are looking at not limiting it to medical professionals, but it could be any person who goes through a 6-month training that would train them in how to administer psilocybin and hold space for it, which I think is great. There's such a need for that. And why, you know, who wants to invest tens of thousands of dollars in some credential just to do something like that? On the other hand, I can say from my own experience that what I bring from my therapeutic background and stuff is super valuable. And there's a lot to be said for that too. So I'd like to see a mix. And I think that can happen, yeah.
And what do you think, because again, it seems like a training program that there is a real benefit in that. And then at the same time, you know, I would imagine 6 months and then you have a piece of paper. There could be a lot of problems with that as well. You know, versus someone who has had decades of experience.
Yeah,
and
I think the program's going to be set up in a way where it's not just, you know, multiple choice on the computer, but actual discussions and groups, and you have a mentor and you go through practice sessions and stuff, and also they will not graduate somebody if they feel that person is not, I would hope, you know, if they feel that person is not going to be qualified, that they would withhold that certification. That was the way it was for my school too. But yeah, how do you create and grow a whole new culture? And break out of the medical model that has everybody in a box, medicine, and as a drugging people, you know, but still train them in what counts and what's important, which is how to sit with somebody and be with somebody and hold space for them and listen to what the medicine's trying to do and help them in that way. I mean, how did you get your training, Jason? I think it was on the job, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, I mean, because even in some of the traditions we've experienced, I mean, there is a very particular training, much like medical school, in ingesting plants.
In terms of being a curandero or,
going into diet, fasting, meditating.
Turning inside, exactly. The shamanic training, which is dying and being reborn over and over again. Yeah.
But then it's very interesting because when I finished a quite long training, and I worked with some other traditions as well. It was very, I mean, some was actually the words of one of my teachers, which was, you know, I've given you everything I have, now you have to go work, don't come back.
Sometimes it's the best thing, out the door with you.
And that was very jarring because, you know, I mean, on the one hand, I had learned, you know, a considerable amount. In retrospect, I think much more than I realized at the time, because some of it just takes time to manifest. But for the most part, I was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I mean, yes, I know like certain things and but I mean, now I'm just supposed to go and like, you know, heal people. It just seems quite overwhelming. So it was a little jarring, like the don't come back part, because it's like, but I want to come back. Like I have all these questions for you.
And he or she knew that, I'm sure.
But so that was part of it. But there was also, it correlated to a very deep sense of like, okay, I've done all this work now on myself. My learning now is working with other people.
Yeah.
And that was very much whatever you want to call it, serendipitous, synchronistic, of working at the temple and really going back in and working full time, almost without stop, 10 months out of the year. And
total immersion program.
Yeah, total deep immersion.
For
and
you, right?
Because I found that's where also a tremendous amount of the training was happening, was, using my own experience, and then how do I work with all of these other people and be able to serve them in a way, and sometimes working with 23 people, it's a lot. It's 23 worlds, 23 lifetimes potentially of stuff, and how to do that in the best of my ability, and to do it in a skilled way. And there's, at least for me, there's no other way to do that than to stick my feet in the mud and to do it. And I'm really grateful for that too. The temple, the format, the kind of nonstop work, group in, group out. 23 people in, 12 days, 23 people out, and how to really get those 23 people to experience like the best that they can experience, to really go in and get what their intention is, and often what they don't even know is beyond that.
Right.
And there really is, there's no, at least for me, that there's no substitute for just
Right. No, there's no substitute. And a few things that came to mind. Let's see. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you couldn't have had a little training before you went in. It could have helped a little bit. I bet. I bet, and I also bet that some of the training you got was just from talking with other facilitators and people. The transmission of experience, which is often what happens in a teaching format. However that happens. And, it could have been okay to have a practice run or two, but hey, you got thrown in the deep end. But I also want to say that, you become part of the container for those people. You are holding those 23 people in your heart, in your psyche, in your energy field. And I mean, I always looked at you guys and go, how do they do that? And then another group comes in and they just do it again. Because I'm used to working one-on-one for an hour. And then, okay, next. But it's totally different. Energetically, But, just to acknowledge the depth and the sincerity of that work, and then I suspect it's something that comes from your heart or spoke to your heart in some way, and not everybody would have felt that calling or lasted as long as you have, or ripened in the ways that you have ripened. There's also a matter of, what's the vocation is the word, right? Just the calling. This is right for some people, and for other people it's like, they may think so, but it really doesn't fit. And it requires the ability to really be with somebody, whether it's one-on-one or in a group, I guess, and really offer your consciousness up while still retaining the clarity of your awareness. Right? I'm just imagining from my own experience, offering it up as a ground for their growth, right? And whatever they need can come through you. And I've seen this in so many ways in my own work, and there's a Buddhist phrase for it, taming whoever, teaching whoever in whatever way, manifold experience. Whatever is needed will come through at the right time. And I have constant moments of saying things, it's like, where'd that come from? I didn't say that, I didn't think that, it just came through me, right? And I would imagine you have the same too, maybe?
It's very funny, because sometimes I'll get a message from someone and they're like, you said this thing to me, and it's like, it stuck with me. And I'm like, I said that?
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, that does kind of sound like something I would say.
But I don't remember it at all. Yeah, so in that sense, it's, I don't know, can we say shamanic work or spiritual work, in that you're the vehicle through which whatever needs to show up can be transmitted. And you don't have to plan out every word or study every sentence or whatever. There can be a spontaneity to it that feels really good. And that comes with time and experience again, and trust that comes from experience. Yeah. And you get better with it over the years, right?
Yeah, and I think that trust is huge, and that's very experiential as well. Is as you said, like when a difficult experience comes up, it's different trusting in the way of like, oh, like I read that that's okay, versus,
Ah.
oh yeah, like I think I've been there. I don't know 100%, because again, we can never truly
Right.
know, but
I feel a familiarity with the territory you're talking about,
Mm.
and to me it feels like this, and
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's profound in that way. It's something that's very subtle, but it's, as you talked about, kind of these energetic fields, the power of the word. I mean, there's a much more powerful transmission, if I can say, from a place of not like a knowing from here, but a knowing of like, it's going to be okay. Like it is.
Yeah.
You're fine. It's okay.
Yeah, it's got to be that embodied knowing that has that authenticity.
Mm.
Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything, right?
Mm.
There, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that comes from your own experience
Mm.
of being through those tough places. And
Yeah.
look, you made it, So, yeah, and another...
Kind of. I'm not.
Yay! Well, you're here.
Kind of.
I think you're here. The other thing that came up was, the learning that we do is, of course, learning and studying and reading, it's valuable, at least for me. I learned by that. But the biggest learnings I've had have been through my life experiences, right? And in particular, the biggest ones, the hardest ones, that they distill down in an alchemical way to help create this open, willing field. Like, if I can show up for all the hard stuff that's happened in my life, I can sure show up for the person sitting across from me in the Zoom session or whatever,
Yeah.
Or I can sure show up for this difficult ayahuasca ceremony or tobacco ceremony, because what the heck? I know that I know how to show up.
That to me seems like one of the really important parts of this plant medicine work is it does shake us. There's more water too if you want. It has a little holy basil in it. But it seems, I was talking to this guy Joey about this, and before we started rolling, you came in. This is the first time you've been here, and you were kind of exploring the place, and saying, oh, I recently got these sheepskin rugs, alpaca rugs, and the textiles, and a big part of that is it's comfortable. It's aesthetically pleasing. It makes me feel at home. It makes my life a little easier. Like this heater, it makes my life a little more comfortable. And that just seems like such a natural, beautiful part of being a human. Is we want our lives to be more comfortable. We want things to be easier. That's why we do work. That's the basis of any investment technique. Is you work hard in the beginning to invest so that you get to reap the fruits of the reward down the line. And
if you live long enough.
If you live long enough, yeah. But even that, of course, there's so much that's out of our control. But, to a degree, like what food do I put in my body? That's a sense of an investment. And what are my words? What are my actions? And but so in that sense, comfort is a beautiful thing. But it seems like, to me, one of the main... I don't know exactly what the word is, but one of the main components of any of these plant medicine rituals or esoteric practices is like taking us out of that comfort zone, and to the degree we're willing to go, and maybe sometimes to
beyond
the degree
that.
beyond that. Because as you said, if we're able, and sometimes we can't manage that. It is overwhelming seemingly, and yet in the grander scheme, unless we die physically, we come out of it.
Well, and even then, where do we emerge into?
Right, yeah. And that it's teaching us in a way, like if we can navigate those spaces, then these things that happen in this reality aren't that big of a deal. And they can be, and life, I'm sure, will test us all. There's all things we have to deal with, death and decay and loss of loved ones. But as you said, if you're in a ceremony and your body is dissolving into a million pieces and, you're off in some random part of the universe, and then you survive that and you come back and your boss is yelling at you, and of course those same patterns are going to, the adrenaline, the anger. But if we can integrate that in a way and put it in perspective, it's like, oh,
right.
Like who cares?
Right, right.
It's either
the
like
line's too long at the checkout, traffic jam, Of course, you learn this from living in Asia, too. But
that seems like such a huge part, and a lot of that is perspective. And I think so many of these traditions, they point to this, and again, I've used this analogy a lot, but these things like vipassana, to see something like it actually is, maya, that we see the world through a veil. Apocalypse, it actually means it's not the end of the world, it's the end of the world as we see it, so to take the veil up and to see the world as it actually is. And one of the beauty of these modalities is it shifts our perspective in a way. I mean, even more of the scientific work, it seems to be showing like there's neurogenesis, there's neuroplasticity. It's literally like allowing us to see something from a different point of view.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great that science can prove that changes happen here, but for me, like, I don't care if there's a mechanism shown or not, because still it doesn't really show anything directly, right? I care about I'm a phenomenologist. I care about the actual experience, So, as you were speaking, I was thinking how psychedelic and plant journeys can broaden our experience, just like traveling around the world can, or living in a foreign culture can, or learning a different language can, in a way. It really opens up possibilities, and it starts to give you a different sense of what's important and the relativity of certain things, and just a respect and a humility for the mystery that we're in all the time, that we just don't think about because I gotta go to the store and buy this and In that sense, it's deeply spiritual, and that is also something that people are seeking through coming to plants and psychedelics, I think. Some kind of connection with the divine or what's greater. And that's, they open up those realms. Inside our heads or outside. They introduce us to that. And it's a very ancient tradition, right? If you go back to the mysteries at Eleusis and the potion that, whatever it was, that they drank in the cup there. But the way that shaped Greek society and the ancient Greeks, they would write things like, whoever has gone through the mysteries at Eleusis has no more fear of death. And what an incredible gift. And that's something I also think about through my own work with plant medicine. I mean, first with Buddhism and meditation, but then with plant medicine, it's like, I'm not saying I wouldn't object mightily if a tiger were going to leap on me right here. Like, I would object, there would be animal fear. But there's an increased curiosity that it's given me towards death. Like, wow, I wonder what's on the other side. Because I have a feeling it's just another journey. And how many times have I journeyed out of this body and then come back? And there's absolutely going to be a time when I journey and I don't come back to this body. That happens for everyone, So they're doing work with psilocybin therapy for people with terminal cancer diagnoses and also with their family members. And they're finding, wow, huge reduction in anxiety, huge increase in peace after just one session. The topic being death. That's one of the many gifts it can bring.
Why do you think that's what's happening? That when someone, even with one ceremony, I mean, obviously that's a very specific group. The stakes are very high. What do you think is happening that's allowing them, in a sense, to be at peace with what is?
What they say when they come back is, I saw the bigger picture, is my word. They might say something else, I saw what lies beyond this reality. And I felt peace and comfort and love there. And now I feel like I have a connection with it. And I know I'm going to go there when I die. Whatever that means, Just, it's not unknown territory anymore. And I think that's kind of what I'm saying too, that these journeys with plants and medicine have given me a sense of the territory that lies beyond this body. And it becomes more intriguing, a little less scary.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be such a common motif in any of these shamanic or esoteric traditions, is this idea it's a preparation for death.
Yeah. Don Juan, right? Castaneda, take death as your advisor. So many Buddhist practices, you go sit in the charnel ground and look at the bones and meditate on the ephemerality of the body. Cremations. Yeah, and that's also very grounding in this life then, right? Makes us be here now, because this is what we got. Maybe many times over, or who knows, but it's, life wouldn't be the same without death.
Do you think in Tibetan Buddhism there was a plant medicine tradition that was lost? Because certainly it seems that way if you look at the little pieces in the Greek mystery schools, those seem to have arisen from Egypt, and Egypt is just littered with motifs of ceremonies, death, preparation, the world beyond.
And the rishis and the Rig Veda and the Amrita, or whatever,
Soma.
the Indian Soma, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think somebody recently came out with a book suggesting that about Tibetan Buddhism, but I haven't read it or seen it. And in my previous past, I didn't come across any reference to it, but we're discovering new things about the past all the time, right? It wouldn't surprise me. It's pretty wild.
Because like you were saying earlier, I mean, it is very shamanic, and I'm sure a lot of that arose from the bone tradition, but just all of the different dimensions, the realities, the entities one can come into contact with,
right.
The archetypes, what they represent.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but it's also true that these specific practices that they have and the teachings handed down through centuries, and the practice of, say, 3-year retreat or, long-term retreat, definitely those open up new portals, even without a substance, right? And you do journey to different realms, I think, and see things that would be extraordinary by the measure of our ordinary reality, and you come out transformed. So perhaps some forms of meditation are psychedelic also, or vice versa, yeah.
What would you say has been the biggest gift that Tibetan Buddhism has given to you, and what do you think it has the potential to offer people? Because I think there's a lot of curiosity in things like mindfulness, Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, as you said. I mean, it's kind of all over the world now. Yeah,
and also just the fact that if you start working with plant medicine, for example, it's really beneficial to have some kind of spiritual practice. It could be one of many forms, but that, I think, is a top integration recommendation I have for people. The biggest gift Tibetan Buddhism has given me, just one?
As many, whatever comes to mind.
The direct connection and grounding with a lineage that goes back over 1,000 years. There's a power and a strength and a dignity to that I really respect, compared to, I'll try a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which, I did some in my 20s. But I felt there was so much more growth potential for me to put my roots down somewhere. Which doesn't mean I can't learn other things, but just, it's like a marriage, This is my base. I always come back to you, kind of thing. And the fruit of that over 30 years, clarity, wisdom, insight, compassion, the compassion practices. And I will also say that when my son died, it was in Kathmandu, and it was all in the Buddhist context, cremated there and supported by the lamas and everything. And I don't know what I would have done without my meditation practice, because I wasn't meditating to forget about the pain, because that wasn't possible. It was more like, I'm just going to sit in his room and look at his crib on this cushion and feel this with the container that this practice gives me. And that transformed my being and really opened my heart over time in ways that I don't think would ever have happened otherwise. So I'm really grateful for that.
It reminds me, Amika speaks about this idea that in a sense, we're all, as humans, we're orphans. He says we're orphans of time and space. And,
wow, what a beautiful phrase.
yeah, and that, and I often hear that people will describe that when they begin to work with plant medicine as like there's this sense of remembering, remembering who we are, remembering where we come from, and and it seems like, as you were talking about in the beginning, nothing is ever stagnant. Things are always changing, and there's beauty to that. But potentially one of the downsides of that is, as we begin to evolve, we sometimes forget like our stories, which even like for the Tubu Amika, like those stories are like the base of like everything.
Right.
It's like every time you work with a plant, you tell the story. And in the beginning, that was like, oh man, like again, like we just heard the story yesterday, like.
Imagine how many times the plant has heard the story.
Yeah. But I've really grown to see the power in that, because
Yeah.
it's not just a plant. Like there's a story behind it. And that it gives it context. It gives it meaning. It puts it in a time and a place.
Yeah.
And this tremendous power and knowledge can arise from that. So it's just interesting that you say, like, one of the things that you feel like Tibetan Buddhism gave you was this like lineage, which was very tangible. And it seems like that's also something I see so much in people who come down with plant work, is they feel like ungrounded. They feel like they don't have a home. They don't have something that's like that they can hold on to.
Right, and we don't. I mean, as a culture, as a society, we're disconnected from our ancestors, from the planet, from each other, from ourselves, from our bodies, all this. And I see that also as a reflection, again, of that word trauma, in the collective sense this time, and that people like you and me from the United States, or say Australia, or whatever in particular, but also Europeans, but particularly Americans and Australians, we're so uprooted. Our ancestors came over whenever they did, and they didn't leave because they wanted a nice vacation, right? They came because some really, really horrible stuff was happening, and they had to leave and start a new life. And there's strength and beauty in that, apart from what they built that new life on at the expense of Native Americans. It's another layer of trauma. But there is so much trauma in our past, in my past, in your past. I mean, I have Irish blood. I've seen with San Pedro several times the potato famine, which I'm sure my ancestors came over after that. But I've seen, the pain of not being able to feed your children, which is not something I felt in this life, Or, the Holocaust. Apparently I have some ancestors in that too, although I didn't know that, But where am I going with this? Because of this undigested, unacknowledged trauma that can be 6, 7, 8, 10 generations back, whatever, going back to caveman days, for heaven's sake, it's still in our DNA in some ways. Something Ernesto says. And I've seen this on Dieta, and it breaks our connection with that lineage. And there's so much work we can do, again, with plants to clean that and heal that and repair that. How did we get there? Something about people coming down and they're feeling disconnected. Oh, the lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we're all kind of going around, where's our connection? Where's the magic? I'll try this, I'll try that, I'll try yoga, I'll try whatever, and those are good things. But I also believe in finding 1 or 2 places to sink your roots. And a big possibility that Western people don't recognize is that there are indigenous Western traditions. They're almost exterminated. They're pretty lost through Christianity and the Inquisition and stuff like that. But the pagans, the Gnostics, alchemy, astrology, these more hidden, esoteric Western things. Sometimes people find they want to sink their roots in that. Or diet plants that come from the West instead of South America, right? Stuff like that.
Are you familiar? Well, yeah, I know you are familiar, at least in some of those. Is that something you can talk a bit about? Is those more European esoteric traditions? I mean, I know you're familiar to some degree with astrology, What do you think the roots of those are, and like the examples you gave, are they interrelated, or they're specific
I'm sure,
lineages?
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's so much I don't know because there's lots of, because that's the way the world is. And it's not, these haven't been well, astrology has been a main tradition for me for like 30 years. I've studied and practiced astrology too. 30 years, 25 years. Yeah. And it's something I really, really appreciate as a language that speaks to me. As a Westerner, it's Western astrology, and it draws on the symbolism of the tarots, woven into that, and the symbolism of Western magic. Not that I know a lot about that, but there's something that feels very connective about speaking that language. And of course, the roots of astrology go back to what they say Babylon, but who knows? Every time I come out here at night and I look at the sky and I see the stars, I'm like, that's the original astrological transmission, right? Because the stars are so bright here in the mountains in the Milky Way. So it's a wisdom tradition, and it feels good to be connected with another language through which wisdom can flow. I've read a bit about pagans, ancient pagans, druids, Gnostics, which Christians pretty much wiped out, but they're a very interesting group of people. And I think there's something to be said for us as Westerners going back to the ancient roots of our traditions, which have been so almost eradicated, and just even doing a little reading or exploration to kind of connect with those ancestors and help revive that lineage or heal those wounds. Because Europeans have been so wounded, right? And that is also how Europeans, and I'm speaking of us too as Americans or whatever, people of European ancestry could come to the New World and enslave people and oppress people and kill people, because terrible, terrible things were done to them in Europe also.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because talking about etymology, the etymology of slave is Slav.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. And they were the European slaves.
I didn't know that. Wow, that's powerful.
So with astrology, how would I'm getting you to define everything, but so many of these things, again, astrology is something. It's like that's what you do. You get the Sunday paper and you look at your horoscope. And
that's not astrology. That's just entertainment or something. Yeah. I mean, astrology is really the art and science of looking at the I like all these words, the synchronistic juxtaposition of the planets in the sky at a certain time. And I won't say the effects it has on Earth, right? Because I don't know of a causal mechanism. How could Jupiter being in Leo affect whatever happens at the time? It's too far away, it's not big enough, we don't see any waves coming from it. Science at the current moment can't measure any physical effects. That doesn't mean they don't exist, right? It just means the instruments are not precise enough. But the way Jung described it was an acausal synchronicity. It doesn't have to be a causal mechanism, it can be a synchronous mechanism. This arises in time and this happens here, right? These two things happen, and in between, this is a language that you can learn to interpret and speak, and you never end learning it too. So, exploring one's own natal chart is usually the best way to start with that, and getting some deep readings by good people who do not just give you a printout from a computer, but actually do the work of creating a personal exploration. And it's always great to start with yourself, because presumably that's the person you know the best, but still not well enough. So there can be many, many things to learn. I remember a friend came over and did my chart, and my husband's chart, long time ago. And I was just like, wow, there are things here that I never acknowledged before. Or that explains this aspect of my character or his character that I don't have to look at or judge as bad or wrong. It could just be, well, this is the way the energy goes, So it can create self-understanding and a lot of respect, a lot more compassion sometimes for other people. And, I'm talking about psychological astrology. I just find it so fascinating. But the sun sign columns in the newspaper have nothing to do with it, because where you were born, the date and time and place of your birth, that's unique to you. If you're a twin, even if you're a twin, your twin came out a few minutes later, right? Even if you were born in New York City, a certain date, place, and time, and there's 3 other people who have a similar or identical chart, you're all going to be living it in different ways. Yeah? It's not imposed from the top. It's more like how you as a soul want to come through the matrix of what you've been given in this life and live it. So, I find it fascinating. Sometimes with ayahuasca, it speaks to me through astrological symbolism. It's just another language. And it's, it's a great thing on the path of growth.
It reminds me a little, we live in an interesting time where like we speak a lot about diversity and how beautiful that is. And yet it seems like often the narrative is not diverse at all. It's like you have to think and believe this or you're outcast.
That's right. We're going to diverse you right out of here.
Do you think, this is just kind of coming to me, do you think that that's maybe one of the beneficial things of something like astrology and birth reading is like recognizing like, we are different, like by birth, by the nature of who we are, like we tend to gravitate towards certain things. We think in different ways. We have certain powers. We have certain weaknesses. Going back to Amika, that's a big part of his teaching too, is that we all have a role.
Yeah.
And it's also based just on that, like when you're born, like how you're born. And that, again, so much of our suffering seems to be like, who am I? I don't have a role. I don't have a tradition.
Right.
We live in this amazing time where I can do anything.
Right,
like
but what does that mean if I don't know who I am? Yeah, exactly. No, that's so true. I really like what you said at the end, because, we don't know who we are. We're free to do anything, but what does that mean? We don't have gender to tie us down anymore, so, what does that mean? Incredible freedom and opportunities, and also incredible rootlessness and suffering, right? And so self-knowledge, self-study, know thyself, I think is an ancient truth that still applies, and astrology is very much something that's helped me know myself, both the challenges I have and the imprints and the difficulties and what I need to work on and grow with, and the talents and skills that I never thought before that was something I had to give, So I love doing natal readings for people because it just really opens things up. And I'm very interested in the potential confluence between astrology and ayahuasca, both as paths of self-knowledge and growth, right?
So where do you see yourself going from here? Do you have like a vision of how your life is going to begin to unfold, how you incorporate these things? Is this your work, or is it just something that is a part of your life? Do you have any idea where it's moving?
I feel like there's a direction, and I'm being either propelled or guided in that direction. But I never planned the life I have now in the valley. I didn't plan this. 10 years ago, I'd have been like, wow. I'm still like that, I just kept following step by step where I felt like I was being led. What can I say? And I feel like the medicine brought me here. I got to do a lot of personal work in the last 6 years that I've really needed to, and I'm moving more into the phase of like, okay, I want to give a little more. And I'm really feeling called back to spend more time in America. Well, I'm still going to have a base here and live here, but it's time for me to bring back more of what I've learned here to the States. And I'm so excited by plant medicine right now and this whole path that I'm on. But honestly, 10 years, who knows? I don't plan these things anymore. They come. And it's a real blessing. And there's a huge satisfaction in seeing all the elements of my past, including the difficult ones, come being able to bring them together and use them in support of people's own growth and process, it makes it like doubly or triply meaningful. Yeah, like recycling those nutrients into fertilizer that can fertilize other people's soil, and then that process keeps going, I guess. Yeah. Alchemy, totally. It's all very alchemistic what we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, beautiful, Kerry. We're coming up on 3 hours. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to talk about?
The only message I'm getting is that plant medicine is amazing and beautiful work, and it deserves to be approached with respect and humility. And that doesn't mean you have to dress in native costume or follow native traditions. It's more really a matter of coming from your own heart and showing up for that kind of work with authenticity and vulnerability and humility and curiosity. That's really the fundamental message I'm always giving people. Just depends on how you show up, and everything else can come from there. So yeah, that's all I got.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I didn't have an exact plan of where this would go, but we touched on some really beautiful topics and things that I'm very interested in, and I've really learned a lot. And thank you so much for sharing. You have a beautiful way of expressing and kind of bringing these things together. And I really hope that this gets out there and people really benefit from it.
And people watch all 3 hours.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation and the back and forth.
Yeah. And if people are interested in getting in touch with you, if they want to learn more or work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, my website is ayahuascawisdom.com, and I have a blog on there. I write about ayahuasca integration and sometimes other plants. And I talk about there's information on one-on-one sessions with me. I just do integration work now, so I don't work long-term with people, but I do 1, 2, maybe 3 integration sessions or preparation sessions, primarily with ayahuasca, but other psychedelic experiences welcome too. There's also an integration course that I've developed called Integrating Ayahuasca Program, and info about that is on my site also. It's 10 weeks of articles, videos, exercises, resources to support people in their integration, and a lot of it came out of things I developed for the temple. So, yeah.
Great. Someone actually just reached out to me looking for a female integrator, so I will pass your info on. Well, thank you, Kerry. This was beautiful, and thank you for your time and for sharing and everything you do. And yeah, we'll get this out. And like I said, I hope some people reach out to you and just that this information continues to spread. And that was a big part of creating the podcast, was just to give voice to people who I think are doing really good work. And as this work begins to spread, to get voices of groundedness and reason and people who are coming from a genuine place of the heart. So thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm really happy to be a part of it. Thanks for providing this place.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kerry. All right, everybody, that is it. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kerry. I very much enjoyed it myself. Thank you guys for tuning in. As always, if you're able to support the podcast, that's a really big help to me to continue to do this work and to bring on these guests. Patreon is a really good option. There'll be a link in the show notes to that, but it's a subscription service for as little as $1 a month. You can subscribe and you get back really nice benefits, things like early access to shows, Q&As, bonus material, and it's a really good way to give and to also receive something back, kind of this very... especially here in the Andes, this principle that they call Aini, or reciprocity. So that's a really big help to me. To all the people who have done that, thank you very much. I really appreciate all the support. There's also the option of donating directly via PayPal. There'll be a link to both of those in the show notes. And then if you're not able to do that, simply going on the YouTube page, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. That's a really big help with the algorithms that the show can get out to a bigger and broader audience. Also, feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comments section. And then with the audio version going on Apple Podcasts, because that's still the biggest platform, subscribing to the show, leaving a starred rating and a review, that's a really big help in getting the show to a bigger and broader audience via the audio version. So that's it. I'm not sure the exact order of the following guests coming up, but as always, I hope to continue to bring on really fascinating guests for you all. So thank you very much. I appreciate all the support. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Doom.